3 p.m. every weekend, only on GBNews, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 12th of July. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver. It is actually 12:09, don't want to confuse you.
Deaths in the Channel. 4 more migrants have died after attempting to cross the dangerous 26-mile shipping lane that is the English Channel. We'll have the very latest from France and ask if smashing the gangs is really a viable strategy now to save lives.
And will Joe go as the leader of the free world confuses Volodymyr Zelensky for Vladimir Putin and calls Kamala Harris Vice President Trump? Panic is spreading across Capitol Hill, with leading Democrats now thinking the unthinkable.
Bridge body bag. Police released an image of a male suspect after 2 suitcases containing human body parts were found on Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. We'll have the latest.
And the man found guilty of hatching a depraved plot to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby is being sentenced today. He could face life imprisonment. We're live at the court.
Well, to our top story today, 4 migrants have died while crossing the English Channel, capsizing off the northern French coast near Boulogne-sur-Mer this morning.
Yes, and according to French Coast Guard, 63 migrants were rescued in the operation, a tragic event which the Home Secretary has called truly awful.
This is just the latest in what have been a number of deaths this year. And although the weather has not been perhaps what you would expect for July, we have seen increased numbers of crossings and particularly heavily laden boats.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, these are the first deaths in the Channel under the new government. Keir Starmer will have to set out to the country how he's going to change this, as we're seeing more and more deaths in the English Channel as people make this treacherous journey at the moment. We know the policy is to smash the gangs. Of course, that will take time, and there is some doubt over whether that will be efficient way in stopping these crossings anyway. So lots of questions to be asked of the government, how they're going to prevent future deaths in the Channel. Experts
that we've spoken to have said that smashing the gangs is rather like playing whack-a-mole, because this is such a lucrative industry. As soon as you go after one gang, perhaps you'll be successful in shutting it down. But just as we've seen in the drug war, another issue where the government has tried to shut down what are deeply lucrative operations, others simply pop back up. Is this going to be a never-ending issue? Is there going to be a need, as 15 EU countries have now accepted, to have some sort of third country deterrent, some sort of operation of offshore processing? Of course, the Rwanda deterrent has been scrapped by this government. Big questions as to whether that would have worked in the first place, whether the scale of it was large enough. But also, with nothing to replace it, nothing there instead, other than this proposed policy to smash the gangs, to seek legal routes as well, is that enough?
Yes, as it stands, there does not seem to be a deterrent policy. There isn't one in Labour's manifesto. We'll be hearing more, I'm sure, in the coming days from Yvette Cooper, the now Home Secretary, and Sir Keir Starmer too. Do we need a deterrent? Is it enough, as Tom says, to just go after the gangs? Is it enough?
Well, we're going to cross stateside now, because it's been another day with another couple of gaffes from Joe Biden, as the US president made this particular mistake, pretty awful mistake, when welcoming Ukraine's President Zelensky onto the stage at the NATO summit yesterday evening.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
And if that wasn't bad enough, when asked a question about his vice president, Kamala Harris, he had this to say.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
Of course, he was referring to Kamala Harris rather than Trump, but he seemed to get the names confused. Of course, Joe Biden is no stranger to gaffes. What about the time he tried to shake hands with someone at the end of a speech who was not there before seemingly aimlessly wandering around the stage?
Or perhaps when he had to be effectively herded back to the group of world leaders here by Italy's Giorgia Meloni, then after he wandered off at the G7 summit just last month.
Joe Biden continues to insist that he will be the Democrat candidate at November's presidential election. But after these latest gaffes, just how much longer can he go on?
Well, let's get more on this now with GB News reporter Charlie Peters. I mean, Charlie, we could have gone on for hours showing all the gaffes from President Joe Biden. It does seem as though the Democrats are turning on him now.
20 have now publicly called on him to stand down and, in some of their words, pass the torch onto a new presidential nominee for the upcoming November presidential elections. 20 congressional Democrats, one senator, Peter Welch, from Vermont, among them. And it comes amid quite a ginormous narrative collapse for the Democrats on Biden's cognitive ability. Now, you've just shown two previous gaffes that the president has made in recent months, but for many years now, concerns have been raised about Biden's capacity to operate effectively if he's not too tired. He's been nicknamed Sleepy Joe, of course, by his likely challenger in November from the Republican side, Donald Trump. But the Democrat side in the media and indeed his allies in Congress have repeatedly said that this is a sort of a right-wing lie. But since the 27th of June, that big debate with Donald Trump, termed as a disaster by many of his allies, I mean, Biden's team and himself, he said, I had a bad night. That narrative has gone away. The Democrats have avoided defending him as much as before. Many senators who aren't saying anything in public are using sort of mealy-mouthed language about his status, saying it's up to Biden to do what he does, and we'll see what he can get on with. And while it comes to his allies, we've shown that clip of him referring to Kamala Harris as Vice President Trump. Let's take another clip at some of his cabinet who are filmed reacting to that moment.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president until I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one.
Well, you've got Secretary of State Antony Blinken there. For those listening on the radio, you've also got Lloyd Austin, the Defence Secretary, and the third in, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. Lloyd Austin, to his credit, he's steely-eyed throughout, but you can see a sort of gasp almost from Blinken. He looks down, almost in shame. But Jake Sullivan covers his chin. He's if I had to play poker against any of them, I'd play against Jake Sullivan. He gives away his feeling very clearly. It's obvious now, isn't it, that those close to Biden are extremely concerned, but he's vowing to fight on.
But the issue here, of course, is, as you talk about, the narrative. Of course, everyone remembers George W. Bush making all sorts of gaffes throughout his career, but they weren't connected to a narrative of cognitive decline. It's now potentially the case that things that Biden would have got away with 10 years ago, because everyone misspeaks every now and again, but it's almost like he now needs to be whiter than white. He has to be far more fluent than you'd expect on average, because every little thing will now be leapt upon because it fits this broader narrative.
You might say people are...
That's very generous, Tom.
People are being more focused on these areas than perhaps they have been in recent months and years, because it's become so obvious that omerta has broken. They have to talk about it. And on that particular point of how he's pushing back on the narrative against this view of cognitive decline, needing to be whiter than white, and many critics are saying that he's actually opening himself up for more attacks. I mean, last night in this press conference, termed a make-or-break press conference for Biden after June 27th, he told a reporter that he needs to pace himself better and that he's been going full bore since that debate. He's held rallies in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. But it's important to stress that those rallies have been with a teleprompter. He's been guided. At the NATO summit, the opening 3 nights ago, he was reading a speech from a teleprompter. Again, when he's coming to do press conferences, unaided, unguided, that's when you're finding more of these gaffes.
And Keir Starmer was asked, the Prime Minister was asked about his cognitive abilities, wasn't he?
Well, yeah, Keir Starmer said he's not senile, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement for the US president. But at the same time, there's also been an interesting contrast display between the Labour policy on the House of Lords, anyone over 80 should step down. Well, President Joe Biden is 81. Do Labour think that he's up to the task?
Yeah, very, very interesting that there seems to be a bit of cognitive dissonance there
Yes,
with
a
the
little
leadership
bit.
of the Labour Party. Charlie Peters, for now, thank you very much indeed.
Right, we can get more analysis from the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Gift. Thomas, thank you very much for joining us again. You just saw that sequence of quite recent gaffes. I think it's got to be said the most recent was a clanger and a half.
Well, it's great to be with you, Emily. Thanks so much for having me. You know, I actually think that last night was kind of the worst of all worlds for Democrats because Biden had enough flubs that it certainly won't reassure critics. But it was good enough when he was talking about foreign policy, for example, and how the United States is going to deal with China and Russia, that he could plausibly make a case for staying in the race. And so we still seem to be in this purgatory where everyone's asking, will he stay? Will he go? Everyone, as Tom mentioned, does make mistakes and talk sometimes, but because it does fit into this narrative of cognitive decline, everything's magnified.
And yet we're starting to see perhaps the biggest problem for Biden, senior Democrats on the Hill, both saying explicitly now, but also perhaps implicitly. I'm talking about, for example, Tim Kaine, the former vice presidential nominee for the Democrats, still a senator, of course, who was saying, well, Joe Biden needs to do the patriotic thing. Although, of course, not explaining what the patriotic thing is. There are lots of people who are sort of choosing very delicate forms of words, almost hedging their bets, which is clearly deeply destabilising.
Absolutely. And I do think that we're seeing an escalation here. So first it was Democrats talking in private and just rumors and speculation about asking Biden to step down. Now we're seeing some rank and file lawmakers on Capitol Hill saying more explicitly that they think that Biden should pass the torch. And I think the last place that we could end is leadership, senior leadership. And so if Speaker of the House, for example, or former Speaker Nancy Pelosi comes out very strongly and says, look, this is just not a viable presidency, I think that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yes, what Nancy Pelosi has had to say so far is a little bit confusing, isn't it? Because she suggested that he still has a decision to make, yet Joe Biden has made it very clear that he's made that decision. What really was Nancy saying there?
Well, I think she was saying, Joe, it's time to go. But I absolutely agree with you, which is that she keeps saying Biden needs to make a decision. And that's what other Democrats are saying. But he has. He has made a decision. It's just not the decision that she likes. So I think she's holding out hope that Biden changes his tune.
It does really feel like the sort of sands are shifting in this whole situation, and that we could be in for a pretty busy late July and early August for senior Democrats. But for now, founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Gift, really appreciate your thoughts and indeed your expertise.
Thank you very much. Now, coming up, we're going to be live at the sentencing of Gavin Plumb. This is over the Holly Willoughby rape and murder plot. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I'm joined by showbiz journalist Steph Tetchy and the author Suze Holder. Welcome to you both, ladies. Right, what's top of the menu? What we got?
Oh, well, we've got this story about Elvis Presley and his blue suede shoes, Susan.
Yes, well, I am a huge, huge Elvis fan.
Me too.
And if I don't get home and find those blue suede shoes kind of wrapped up for me, waiting for me, but they did go for £120,000, so possibly they won't be waiting for me, but oh my goodness, what a thing that somebody has actually managed to get those. So, yeah, so Elvis is obviously famous for a lot of things, but he did bring blue suede shoes out in the 1950s. He wore these shoes and they were auctioned at a place in Devizes yesterday. So I do just think it's key memorabilia for somebody who's an Elvis fan. There is an Elvis exhibition, do you know, at the moment. Have you been to that yet?
No, where
you
is
should
it?
get yourself down there. It's at London Bridge, and lots of things from Graceland are actually on exhibition there. So the blue suede shoes won't be there because they'll be. We don't know who's bought
the
them.
owner.
Somebody will have bought them. But his gold suit, which is also a very, very famous thing. He had a foil gold suit.
Is that there at this display?
It's at the It's about...
How's Graceland? Is it good?
I'd live there. You know what it is? It's an amazing place because you can visit so many places that people have been, or like you go to the White House, lots of presidents have been there, or you go to other places. This is a home. And although it's kind of wacky, crazy, amazing, it does feel like a family home. There's not many places you can visit that is so connected to a person.
Elvis Presley, blue suede shoes. If you're minted, 120 grand for a pair of those, that's a snip.
I think it is. I think it is. Yeah, absolutely.
I thought they would have gone for millions.
Same here.
Yeah, and they are authenticated. They were given away by Elvis. He gave away an awful lot of things. He gave it to one of his guys, one of the Memphis Mafia, Alan Fortas.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 12. Now, 4 migrants have died today whilst crossing the English Channel, capsizing off the northern French coast near Boulogne-sur-Mer early this morning.
Yes, according to French Coast Guard, 63 migrants were rescued in the operation, a tragic event which the Home Secretary has called truly awful. Now, we know in recent days that the numbers crossing that channel, despite a bit of weather, really have been increasing. This is the first deaths now in the channel since we've had a Labour government.
And it does just go to show that there are some genuine policy questions now about what happens. Is it enough to simply say, we'll smash the gangs, because people are still attempting this treacherous crossing?
Indeed. Well, we're going to... OK, well, yes. So there's lots of questions, aren't there, really, for the government now. They don't want the Rwanda deterrent. They don't believe that would have worked. They think it's immoral. They think it's too costly, etc., etc. But how do you solve this crisis without one?
And to be fair to the government, what they're saying is they need perhaps international solutions. They're going to look to talk to agreements with European partners, and that may well be part of the solution here. But there is a big question. Many experts have said a deterrent is needed as well as all of the international cooperation, and perhaps we're only going to see a one-pronged rather than a two-pronged strategy here.
Well, yes. But in other news, in order to ease the ever-growing crisis in the criminal justice system, Sir Keir Starmer is set to approve the early release of thousands of what they call low-risk prisoners, with police chiefs warning that inaction would lead to a breakdown of law and order within weeks.
Well, these emergency measures are designed to reduce overcrowding in prisons after a number of available cells in men's prisons fell below 700, although those convicted of violent, sexual or terrorism-related offences are expected to be excluded from these early releases. OK, well, let's get more on this now with GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, can you please explain this policy?
Well, the policy that we're expecting to be announced will be a policy that will allow for the earlier release of those serving prison terms of less than 4 years who are not sexual or violent offenders. And it's believed that the government will announce either a 45 or a 40% serving of a sentence would be the point at which they can be released on licence. At the moment, for those on 4 or fewer years of a determinate sentence, he can be released after halfway through 50% of their sentence. Now, interestingly, we've just had the Ministry of Justice population statistics for the prison estate for the past week released. They show that there are currently 87,500 plus prisoners in the prison estate out of a capacity of just under 89,000. It works out at just over 1,400 available places. Now that might seem like a lot, but actually that can be swallowed up in just a few days. It's so changeable, so it's not the kind of space that really they require. They require a good few thousand less than that for it to be workable, and that's why the government is having to come up with this crisis, this emergency solution. But there's a great deal of concern about who is going to be released, and there will be assurances required, not least from the former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland, who has said that he wants assurances that there will not be any violent or sexual offenders released in this new scheme. This is what he told us earlier.
I have to interrupt you here because we're going to go over to Chelmsford Crown Court, where Gavin Plumb is being sentenced for the kidnap plot of TV presenter Holly Willoughby.
When David Nelson asked you whether she was, quote, going to be returned, close quote, you said no. Later in the exchange, when David Nelson asked what would happen when you were, quote, done, close quote, you said, quote, slit her throat, clean her out, and dispose of her, close quote. Later, still in the exchange, you made it clear that when you were finished, the plan was to slit her throat, wash her in bleach, and dump her body in a lake. You introduced the idea of murdering Ms. Willoughby into your exchanges with David Nelson, and you clearly sought to persuade him to participate in this part of the plan, whether it was to be David Nelson who actually slit her throat, or you doing so with his participation, assistance, or encouragement. That is the basis of your conviction for soliciting murder.
Just for those on radio right now, there may be some distressing content here.
With David Nelson, which you're saying that you had another potential victim to, quote, practice, close quote, on, namely a neighbour of yours. You sent images of your neighbour to David Nelson. You also suggested...
Well, this feed is obviously suspended for legal reasons. We'll be returning to the sentencing of the man that has been found guilty of this kidnap plot of TV presenter Holly Willoughby as soon as those legal restrictions are lifted. But of course, this is a deeply distressing case. It seems that there has been an enormous amount of consternation over it. We will, of course, be returning to that. But first, let's get your very latest news headlines.
To prove that you were serious...
Good afternoon, it's 12:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. A 26-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murders of 3 women in Hertfordshire. 61-year-old Carol Hunt and her 2 daughters, 25-year-old Louise and Hannah, who's 28, were attacked at their home in Bushey. Hertfordshire police say the main suspect has been treated for injuries in hospital since then, but was only arrested today. He remains in a serious condition. The deaths of 4 migrants in the English Channel are truly awful, the Home Secretary has said. Yvette Cooper's comments came as the migrants drowned after their boat capsized. The French Coast Guard says more than 60 people were reported to be on the boat off the northern coast near Boulogne. Latest Home Office figures show 419 people made the journey across the Channel from France to the UK in 6 boats on Tuesday. Well, let's now cross back over to Chelmsford Crown Court, where a man is being sentenced for the kidnap plot of TV presenter Holly Willoughby.
Porn images, in other words, images that had been digitally manipulated to impose Ms. Willoughby's face on the body of another woman in a pornographic situation. At the trial, the jury saw over 900 WhatsApp messages that you exchanged with Mark between 28th December 2021 and 7th of June 2023. The messages included both text messages and voice notes. Many of the voice notes were played for the jury. It appeared from the messages that Mark was Irish, lived in Ireland, and had previously been convicted and sentenced for stalking a woman. During your exchanges with Mark, you exchanged numerous images of Ms. Willoughby, mostly genuine, but at least one deepfake porn image, as well as images of other women, including porn images showing women tied up and or wearing gags. You also discussed plans to kidnap, rape, and otherwise physically abuse Ms. Willoughby with Mark. Many of the messages about what you plan to do to Ms. Willoughby were so horrifying, shocking, and graphic in detail that they were not read out in open court. The jury, however, read every single message during the trial. Accredited members of the press were also given access to the full set of messages during the trial. During your exchanges, you boasted to Mark about your own convictions for your offences in 2006 and 2008. As when you boasted to David Nelson, I'm sure that you did this in order to make clear to Mark that you were not a fantasist, but someone who had a proven record of sexually motivated violence against women, and that you intended to carry out the offences that you were discussing with him against Ms. Willoughby. Quite a bit of your chat with Mark was devoted to the pragmatic details of planning the abduction and rape of Ms. Willoughby, including reference to others with whom you were discussing your plans and whom you hoped to recruit to participate in it. As DC Belsham told us during the trial, the police were not able to recover the full set of all of your exchanges with any others with whom you may have been discussing these matters. But you make numerous statements during the nearly 18 months of your WhatsApp exchanges with Mark that indicate the seriousness of your intent and your disappointment that others whom you had tried to recruit got cold feet. On the 29th of December 2021, for example, Mark asked you, quote, "What's the closest you got to Holly?" Close quote. You responded, quote, "Planning to track her movements. The last guy pulled out, then told me it's just fantasy, despite finding out all the information we did on her." Close quote. During the trial, there was evidence of your chats about Ms. Willoughby with others on the Kick app, including persons with the usernames, quote, Dave Tomcat, close quote, Josh Green 977, close quote, quote, Carisbrook1, close quote, and, quote, Dubliner 1975, close quote. These four were saved in your phone's contacts as Dave Tom, Josh Green, Alfie Noakes, and Mark B, respectively. During your exchanges with Mark, you referred to conversations with others about your plan to abduct Miss Willoughby, including persons referred to as Ryan, Rob, R, which may be a reference to Ryan, Rob, or some third person, Tab 00K and K, and, quote, the other guy, close quote. On 17 February 2022, you referred to having 5 persons in total, quote, on board, close quote, to carry out your home invasion plan, including Mark and you. By 28 March 2022, you were back down to 3 persons, Mark, Ryan, and you, and you said Ryan, quote, was getting cold feet, close quote. In June 2022, you were discussing getting a new crew together. Throughout the nearly 18 months of your WhatsApp exchanges with Mark, you refer to your discussions with others about your plan, with you often expressing disappointment that someone you had thought was seriously interested had got, quote, cold feet, or indeed had blocked you on the relevant app. You discussed with Mark on WhatsApp many of the same topics and details of your home invasion and abduction plan that you later discussed with David Nelson. These included Ms. Willoughby's home address and how best to access it, restraint of Ms. Willoughby and her husband using ropes, cable ties, and other items from your restraint kit, and the use of chloroform to incapacitate them. It was during this period that you purchased online the rope, the metal cable ties, the utility folding knife, and the 2 bottles of chloroform. On the 6th of May 2023, you sent Mark the same video showing your restraint kit that you later sent to David Nelson. On the 14th of May 2023, you sent 2 photos to Mark of various realistic-looking imitation firearms available for purchase online, although there's no evidence that you actually did purchase them. You carried out various web searches on chloroform that were primarily concerned with the legality of purchasing or owning it and its inability to incapacitate a person. The police subsequently discovered, upon analysis of the contents of the bottles, which were unopened when the police seized them, that they did not, in fact, contain any detectable level of chloroform, but only ethanol and water. You, however, clearly believed that you had purchased chloroform when you bought them online from a homeopathic pharmacy. Your claim in your evidence that you had bought the chloroform to clean a stubborn stain on your living room carpet was a particularly clumsy and obvious lie. At various times during your WhatsApp exchange with Mark, you discussed looking for an abandoned property outside of London where you could hold Ms. Willoughby. On one occasion in June 2022, you forwarded to Mark a photograph that had been sent to you of a room on an abandoned stud farm that you thought might be suitable for this purpose. One particularly deeply unpleasant aspect of your exchanges with Mark, which did not appear in your exchanges with David Nelson, was your discussion of restraining Ms. Willoughby's children and using her fear for their safety as leverage with which to control her. Your exchanges with Mark, together with your exchanges with David Nelson and related evidence, form the factual basis for your offences of encouraging or assisting the commission of the offences of kidnap and rape, with the intention that these offences be committed. You have previously been convicted of sexually motivated offences against women, as I've already mentioned, involving the threat of violence and or unlawful restraint. On the 14th of August 2006, when you were 19 years old, you approached a young woman on the Stansted Express and gave her a note saying that you had a gun and that she was to get off at the next stop with you, or you would shoot her, yourself, and everyone else. Other passengers noticed her distress, and you got off the train at Stansted Mount Fitchett. 2 days later, you approached another young woman on the Stansted Express and gave her a note saying that you were a police officer and that she was to get off with you at the next stop for a, quote, quick chat, close quote. She refused, and you got off at the next stop and sat on the platform where the police found you later that day and arrested you. When arrested, you were found to have on you an imitation firearm and 3 rope ligatures. On the 16th of March 2007, for these offences of attempted kidnapping, to which you had pleaded guilty, you were sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 12 months, suspended for 2 years with supervision and activity requirements. On the 11th of December 2008, when you were 21, while you were working at Woolworths in Harlow, you approached 2 16-year-old girls who were also working there with a box cutter or Stanley knife type instrument, and you threatened them, telling them to get to the back of the stockroom. After failing to untangle a piece of rope that you had intended to use, you took out some tape and began to bind the hands of one of the girls behind her back. The other girl escaped, and the alarm was raised. The police attended, and you were arrested. On the 15th of June 2009, for these offences of false imprisonment, to which you had pleaded guilty, you were sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 32 months. There is no offence-specific sentencing council guideline in relation to any of these offences. I have had regard to the guidelines on overarching principles and totality. In relation to the offence of soliciting murder, I have considered the decisions of the Court of Appeal referred to in the sentencing note provided by the prosecution and by the defence. I bear in mind, however, the facts of those cases are quite different to this one. I have had some limited regard to the guideline on attempted murder. However, I bear in mind the decision of the Court of Appeal in the Crown and Franks, which delineates the clear differences between those two offences. In relation to the offence of encouraging or assisting the offence of kidnap, I bear in mind, in relation to the underlying offence of kidnapping, the principles summarised by the Court of Appeal in the Crown and Saqib, S-A-Q-I-B. In relation to the offence of encouraging or assisting the offence of rape, I've had regard to the Sentencing Council guideline on rape. Given that all three of your offences were part of a single plan to kidnap, rape and murder Holly Willoughby, the correct approach in this case is to pass concurrent sentences that reflect the totality of your offending. Although not all of the detail of the plan discussed by you with Mark over the course of 18 months was discussed with David Nelson during the 30 hours or so of your kick message exchanges with him, the plan that you revealed to David Nelson was, in its fundamentals, the plan discussed with Mark. Accordingly, in assessing culpability and harm of your offence of soliciting murder, I've had regard to the evidence about the plan that emerges from the WhatsApp exchanges between you and Mark. The key point in this regard is that the plan to murder Ms. Willoughby was the end point of a plan developed over a considerable time to kidnap and falsely imprison her for the principal purpose of raping and otherwise sexually abusing her over a sustained period of time in ways that, judging by your discussions with Mark, would have been particularly sadistic, brutal and degrading. The plan was, in short, the context in which you solicited David Nelson to murder or assist you in murdering Ms. Willoughby. I have no hesitation in concluding that each of your three offences is one of very high culpability, having in regard in particular to the sexual motivation of your offending and your intention to inflict extreme and gratuitous degradation on your victim. The intended harm of each offence was, in each case, of the highest category for the relevant offence. There is no doubt that if you had genuinely found one or more accomplices who were seriously interested and had been willing to join you in carrying your plan through, then you would have put this plan into action. Turning to the aggravating factors in this case, and taking care to avoid double counting, I find that your offences are aggravated by the following factors. A. Your prior convictions for violent, sexually motivated offences against women by way of attempted kidnap and false imprisonment. B. The lengthy and detailed planning of your intended offences against Ms. Willoughby over the course of nearly 2 years. C. The purchase of items to be used in the commission of the offences, including your restraint kit, a knife, and chloroform. D. The research you conducted into the personal life of Ms. Willoughby. E. The fact that you sought to encourage more than one person to commit these offences with you. F. The fact that you intended to commit these offences in Ms. Willoughby's home and to involve her husband and children and to harm them. And G. Your plan to carry one or more knives to the scene to be used in the attack and to be used to murder Ms. Willoughby. I do find that there is some mitigation in this case. A. Your plan was unlikely to succeed, given, number one, your physical limitations, in particular your gross obesity and the accompanying physical health aspects of that. Secondly, your lack of a car and a driving license, although I note that you were taking driving lessons, and having no driving license would not have prevented you from driving Ms. Willoughby's car. And thirdly, the difficulty you would have had in practice of bringing Ms. Willoughby to your own flat undetected, and your lack of any alternative premises in which to keep her, although you had researched various possibilities. I note, however, in relation to this point, namely the unlikeliness of your offences succeeding, your intended offences succeeding, that the essence of your offences was the soliciting of murder by another and the encouraging or assisting of another to kidnap and rape. That is the essence of those offences. It is fortunate that you did not succeed in finding one or more others who might have been considerably more physically able, and perhaps more able in other ways, than you were at the time of the offending. You were born on the 25th of February 1987. You are now 37 years old. I have borne in mind your background of physical ill health, including increasing struggles with obesity to the point of gross obesity from the age of 13, as well as the social difficulties, physical health issues and mental health issues that have accompanied that. I have borne in mind that all of your research regarding Ms. Willoughby was done online and that you never went to her house or stalked her in person, although it is clear that you considered and discussed doing so. All three of your offences fall within Schedule 19 to the Sentencing Act 2020. Given all that I know about you, having presided over your trial, I do not consider it necessary to have had a pre-sentence report for purposes of assessing whether you are a dangerous offender. I am required first to consider whether I must impose a sentence of imprisonment for life, given the seriousness of each of these offences. Although the offences of which you have been convicted concern only one woman, it is clear from the evidence, including your prior convictions, that you pose a significant risk to women generally of serious harm occasioned by the commission of sexually motivated acts of threatened and actual violence. I find, in other words, that you are dangerous. Having regard to the seriousness of each of your offences individually and together, as well as everything else I know about you, including the facts of your prior convictions for similarly sexually motivated violent offending against women, I conclude that I must impose on you a sentence of imprisonment for life. It will, in fact, be 3 concurrent sentences of imprisonment for life. This is not a case of such extreme seriousness that it is necessary to impose a whole life order. In other words, an order under which there is no possibility of you being released. Accordingly, I must determine the minimum term that you must serve for each of these offences. If I'd been sentencing you to a determinate sentence, taking account of the numerous aggravating and limited mitigating factors in this case, but avoiding double counting, after a trial I would have sentenced you to concurrent sentences of 24 years imprisonment for each offence. Because you would have served up to 2/3 of that sentence in custody, I fixed the minimum term you will serve at 2/3 of 24 years, that is, 16 years. Finally, I reduce that minimum term of 16 years by the number of days which you've spent on remand in custody, 280 days. This means that the minimum term which you will serve before the parole board may consider your possible release is one of 15 years and 85 days. It is important that you and everyone concerned with this case should understand what this means. The minimum term is not a fixed term after which you will automatically be released. You must serve every single day of that minimum term. And it must be served before the parole board can undertake their first review of the case. At that stage, they will review the risk that you then present and will consider whether you can properly be released from custody subject to license at that stage, and if so, on what terms. If and when you are released, you will be subject to license, and this will remain the case for the rest of your life. If for any reason your license is revoked, you will be recalled to prison to continue to serve your life sentence in custody, and it may well be that you will never be released again. It follows that unless and until the parole board consider that your release is appropriate, you will remain in custody, and as I've just said, possibly for the rest of your life. In order to protect Ms. Willoughby from further harassment, you will be subject to a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting or attempting to contact her directly or indirectly, including via social media, email, telephone, post, or text message, and prohibiting you from entering an exclusion zone shown in a map attached to the restraining order. The restraining order also prohibits you from attending as an audience member or for any other purpose any television show or other public event that Ms. Willoughby is presenting or appearing in or at. this order will last indefinitely. Given that I will be imposing a life sentence for each of your offences, it is not necessary for me to make a sexual harm prevention order against you, as the risk that you pose in that regard will be adequately managed through the management of your life sentences. I certify that you've been convicted of a sexual offence, so that you must, for the rest of your life, keep the police informed at all times of your personal particulars, the address at which you are living, and any alteration in the name you are using. You will be given full details of these requirements on a form at the end of this hearing. The offences of which you have been convicted are ones that will make you subject to barring from working with vulnerable adults. You will be told of the restrictions under the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act 2006 by the Disclosure and Barring Service. The statutory surcharge provisions apply to this sentence. Gavin, Plumb, please stand up. Over a number of years, you pursued an unhealthy sexual obsession with Holly Willoughby that led you ultimately to plan over that period to kidnap, to rape, and to murder her. You researched her home address, her security arrangements, her daily routine, her route to work, her family. You assembled a restraint kit. You bought what you believed to be chloroform to incapacitate her and her husband. You intended to harm her husband and her children as part of your plan. You attempted to recruit several people to help you. You discussed with Mark and with David Nelson, and no doubt others, in hideous and revolting detail, the prolonged sexual violence that you intended to inflict on Ms. Willoughby once you abducted her and had her under your control. You had previously been convicted of terrifying offences involving the threat of sexual violence against 4 different young women. I found you to be dangerous. You solicited David Nelson to murder Ms. Willoughby or to assist you in murdering her. You encouraged Mark and David Nelson to participate in your plan to kidnap and rape Ms. Willoughby. The jury saw through the various lies that you told at the trial and convicted you of these offences, for which I now sentence you as follows. For the offence of soliciting murder, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years and 85 days. For the offence of encouraging or assisting the commission of the offence of kidnapping, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term to serve of 15 years and 85 days. And for the offence of encouraging or assisting the commission of the offence of rape, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term to serve of 15 years and 85 days. You may go down.
Well, there we have it. An extraordinary sentencing of Gavin Plumb, the man found guilty of plotting to kidnap, rape and murder the television presenter Holly Willoughby. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum service of 15 years and 85 days.
Yes, 15 years and 85 days. Listening to those details of what he had planned for Holly Willoughby, quite extraordinary. What he did, the plan to kidnap, the fact he'd researched everything about her. He had plans for such sordid sexual violence against her and also harm intended to her family too. The judge there saying that essentially the only mitigations were that he was probably too fat, too grossly obese to be able to actually succeed in carrying out these crimes, and that he didn't have a car or a driving licence. Those were the only mitigations there. Essentially that he may not have been able to do it on his own, but he was looking and seeking accomplices that thankfully he did not find.
Although, of course, he spoke to many potential accomplices, both on WhatsApp and on the Kik messaging app. He spoke with different groups of men, different men with whom he spoke about performing this horrific kidnap plot. Some backed out, some ended up blocking him on these messaging applications, and he accused them of getting cold feet, leading the judge in this case to say this was clearly more than a fantasy for you. Because the defence of Gavin Plumb here was that this was a fantasy, that this would never have actually been carried out. But what the judge has conclusively gone over in this sentencing is how it was very much more than a fantasy. How what Gavin Plumb thought was chloroform was bought. Restraints were bought. He was preparing to take a driving test, to get a driving licence, to get the car to carry this out. Evidence after evidence after evidence. Although it must be said, whilst he was served to 3 life sentences, these will be served concurrently, meaning this monster could be out of prison in 15 years and 85 days.
Yes, interested to know whether you think that is a sufficiently harsh penalty for this man. It's clear he is has the most sordid views of women. He's been considered a danger to all women, not only Holly Willoughby. The judge made that very clear. Previously, he's behaved towards women in a frightening, dangerous way, obsessive over sexual violence. Really the most disgusting specimen, I must say, from what we just heard. But yes, 15 years and 85 days is the minimum sentence given to this man, Gavin Plumb, there.
Well, joining us now is the former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, Chris Phillips. Because, Chris, my goodness me, the judge saying that this man was a threat not just to Holly Willoughby, although he clearly was, but to all women.
Yeah, historically, he's committed other offences, which, whilst he is a fantasist, there's no doubt about that, he's only a fantasist because he's not able to commit the crimes that he would like to. He is a danger, a clear and present danger to any female out there. And this sentence, actually, I think is quite appropriate. And 15 years is a very long time when you consider some of the other sentences we've seen recently.
And he'll have to stay in touch and be monitored by the police for the rest of his life, whether he's in or out of prison, his address, his personal circumstances, if he changes his name, etc., etc. He will be under the police's watch for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think the judge has done a good job here. He's given out a sentence which is appropriate to the offence. But not only that, I think it does send a message, or it should send a message out to other people that might be, commenting online and doing things online to women generally, that it won't be put up with, and decent sentences will be given to people. The only downside to this, of course, is we've also got 40%, the 40% piece that prisoners are going to be released that is just going to be announced today or tomorrow.
Now, I should say that on our screens we're looking at the arrest, the moment that Gavin Plumb, that his house was entered by specialist officers and was first arrested. Of course, this individual was in work as a security guard in Harlow in Essex, which does add another layer to all of this. This was another man in a job that is supposed to be keeping people safe, whereas it turned out that the person who was supposed to be keeping all of us safe was himself the threat.
Yeah, clearly not a patrol officer, that's for sure. Probably sitting in a desk, behind a desk somewhere, monitoring people going in and out. But you're absolutely right. And the fact that he's had these previous convictions just goes to show that this man should never be anywhere near that kind of job. I think there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that people with this kind of history aren't employed as security teams or as we've seen, unfortunately, in the past, as police officers.
Would you say there have been failures then by the police previously or any other agency?
Listen, I think the police have been disassembled by previous governments, which has meant that, bad people are in the police. There's no doubt about that, and all sorts of issues have happened. Security guards, yes, and there's no doubt that the world of security is an easier one to get into than policing. So from time to time, you will get these cases pop up. But let's not get into the blaming of police or blaming of the security associations for this. This is an individual that's quite clearly deranged and pathetic and has got the sentence that he deserved.
And yet this is someone who had, in the past, been arrested and received a suspended sentence after attempting to kidnap 2 women on the Stansted Express. I wonder if we've become too lacking in will to actually see someone put behind bars? Because it seems extraordinary to me, when this clear behaviour was shown over a decade ago, that he didn't go to prison. He simply received a suspended sentence.
Yeah, Tom, you're absolutely right. We're very loath to send people to prison, even though our prisons are completely full. You know, I've seen people that really should have spent a significant time in prison being released on suspended sentences or otherwise. You know, particularly offences against women like that, it's very rarely that these things are a one-off. These things tend to move, you know, and gradually increase in depravity. So, yes, I think when people are convicted of those kind of offences, then prison should be considered, or some other means of controlling them.
And of course, this is a high-profile case because the victim is Holly Willoughby, who everyone in this country knows as being a TV presenter. But there are hundreds of thousands, millions of women in Britain who have gone through some kind of violence from men, at the hands of men, or have been stalked. Things like stalking, and when there hasn't actually been any real violence yet, these things sometimes don't get the focus that's needed.
No. And the mental distress of a lady or woman that's getting that kind of attack, because it is an attack. It's not physical, maybe, but it is an attack on their, you know, on the way they live, on their fears of going out at night, etc. So you're absolutely right. You know, women need to be protected. We've always in society thought that, but more than ever so now, because we've got the ability to communicate, of course, across the social airwaves.
Well, Chris Phillips, formerly of the National Terrorism Security Office, really appreciate your time and your thoughts there. We're going to cross to the court now, Chelmsford Crown Court, and speak with GB News national reporter Theo Chikomba. Theo, this is an extraordinary sentencing.
It is indeed. Well, 37-year-old Gavin Plumb was sentenced to life imprisonment after planning to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Now, this morning we've heard both from the prosecution here at the Crown Court, and they said that Plumb had been researching movements of Miss Willoughby, looking at her home address, knowledge about her whether or not she had CCTV cameras at her home, and that this was all part of a plan to what she described as a plan to abduct and kill. And she said that this places it at the very highest level of seriousness, and that we also heard details in court about how he had been planning to deal with Holly Willoughby's children as part of this planned attack. Now, this all started when he was on the dark web and using particularly the social media app called Kik, and on there he was speaking to undercover officer whose name is David Nelson, which is not his real name, but at the time Plumb did not know this, and they ended up exchanging around 300 messages in which he shared details of how he was planning to attack Miss Willoughby at her home, and this was going over a period of time. And the court also heard today that he had been planning this for over 2 years and had spoken to almost 7 people to carry out this attack. Now, in terms of what we've also heard from Plumb's barrister, Sasha Wass Casey, she said that the defendant is embarrassed and ashamed by the details of his online conversations. They were conversations he always expected that they would remain private, and she added that he never actually left his house, didn't have access to a car, and he was completely incapable of scaling the perimeter of her house. And instead, she argued that it should be looked at, the offences should be looked at in terms of planning, which did not take place, and nothing was actually done. Now, before today, he spent around 270 to 80 days in custody, but today we have learned that he's been sentenced to life in prison for plotting to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby.
Theo, hearing from inside the court that Gavin Plumb, this monster, I think it's fair to say, showed little emotion when he was handed this sentence, perhaps little remorse or no remorse.
Yes, well, inside the court, Gavin Plumb was there the whole time. He was looking up and down, but not really showing any emotion whilst he was sat listening to the judge's remarks. And when that sentencing was announced in the last 20 minutes or so, he didn't really show much emotion. I imagine he's been having plenty of time to think about his actions. But what we do know today is that he has been sentenced to life imprisonment.
Well, Theo Chikomba at Chelmsford Crown Court, really appreciate your reporting on this. Thank you very much for joining us.
And we're expecting we're expecting a statement outside that court, so we will bring you that when it comes.
Now, this all links to the space in our prisons, of course, of which there is very little indeed. In order to ease the ever-growing crisis in the criminal justice system, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is set to approve the early release of thousands of what the government is describing as low-risk prisoners, with police chiefs warning that inaction would lead to a breakdown in law and order within just weeks.
Yes, the emergency measures are designed to reduce overcrowding in prisons after the number of available cells in men's prisons fell below 700, although those convicted of violent, sexual or terrorism-related offences are expected to be excluded from this.
Well, let's get more with our GB News Home and Security editor, Mark White. Because, Mark, it seems to me, in the context of listening to that horrific sentencing, a man who in the past received only a suspended sentence before going on to plot ever more horrific deeds, that perhaps fewer people going to prison is not the best place for this country to be right now.
No, listen, there's definitely risks in adopting a policy that at the end of the day looks to return fewer people to prison that would have gone to prison beforehand. I mean, what the government will say is that violent and sexual offenders will not be included in this. It will be people who have been sentenced to a term in prison that is in excess of 4 years. But those who are sentenced to less than 4 years in prison can expect a reduction in the time that they would have to serve in prison down to 45, even 40% of their sentence time. Currently, it's about 50% of your prison term if you serve that in jail. The rest of that time you can serve back in the community on licence. But you're right in pointing out the fact that there are still sexual offenders who are perhaps seen as low-level offenders, who might not be given a jail term ordinarily, or who might just cross over into the threshold of a lower jail term, that might slip through the net here, that might be people that avoid a prison term. And regardless of that, you've got the situation where thousands of people, they estimate between 8,000 and 10,000 people, could now be released as part of this initiative. These are recidivists. These are people who continue to re-offend when they get back out in the community, and it's those crimes that blight communities, such as burglary, car theft, shoplifting. Often these are people who are addicted to substances such as drug and drink, who are looking to commit crimes to raise money to feed their habits, but they are offenders and repeat offenders, and many of these people will be going out back into communities, so that will without doubt have an impact. We were speaking a little earlier to Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary, and he wants assurances from the new government that absolutely there will be no person that poses a risk to society among those being released back into the community.
We should be looking very carefully to make sure that serious violent criminals should not be released. The first point is that when I was in government, for people who got over 4 years, they were made to serve 2/3 of their sentences. That was a change I brought in, and that's got to be stuck to. And anybody on this scheme shouldn't be a domestic abuser or a stalker or an offender of that nature, because we should be maintaining confidence and making sure the public aren't put at risk. So I'd be very interested to see what type of person they're talking about and when they want to bring this in. Because that's the other point, they can't just immediately rush this through. They need to look at every single case to make sure that the sort of risk to the public is not present, and that confidence can be maintained in the system.
Now, interestingly, we've just had the latest prison population statistics released by the Ministry of Justice. They show that just over 87,500 people are currently being held in prisons in England and Wales. That is out of a capacity of just under 89,000. So, roughly speaking, there's about 1,400 or so prison places still available. That might sound a lot, but actually it's not much headroom at all, because these figures can change on a dime, and that's a real concern. If we get to the point where we're blocked, there is no longer any capacity, with it continuing to head on a trajectory that is more prison places being taken up, then you've got police cells being taken up with prisoners. You've got the whole criminal justice system really grinding to a halt.
Well, Mark White, thank you very much for that update. Some really profound stories today on crime, on law, on order and on justice. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there. Now, do stay with us at 1:30 the hour, 1:30. We're going to be back outside Chelmsford Crown Court. We're expecting a statement on the sentencing of Gavin Plumb. Don't go anywhere.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back. Stefan Kyriazis has, as ever, been to the theatre and saw one of the most successful performers of the modern age, one who has made his name in different genres on television and is always a magnetic presence on the stage. About whom are we talking, Stefan?
We're talking about James Corden, at the Old Vic for The Constituent, and it's Traverse staging. So audience on either side, and it's a fantastic experience. But also it's been done this time to bring everything in a lot and make it quite intimate, because you just have one simple set. It's just a table, office space. This is a new play by Joe Penhall, and it's addressing very, very current issues of safety, especially for people in public service. Doctors, nurses, teachers, and of course, as you know, politicians that are at risk and being attacked. So we have Joe Cox, Sir David Ames, and we have politicians talking about cancelling their surgeries, not wanting to appear in public, teachers being threatened. And James Corden plays an ex-serviceman who is going through a difficult divorce, dealing with a lot of PTSD, also feeling very much like fathers are overlooked, and he wants to fight for their rights. And an old school friend is a local MP, played by Anna Maxwell Martin. And he goes in to start talking to her, and it starts off quite chummy and jovial, and then it darkens and darkens. He gets quite aggressive and frustrated. She wants to help. She's an absolute idealist. This politician's sense of, we don't choose who we work for. You know, we are here by duty to work for everybody in our constituency. It spirals a lot. I have to say, Corden, sensational. Really? He really is a fantastic actor. Of all of them, he's so natural. And he has the most difficult role where his character is shifting all the time and becomes potentially quite threatening and dangerous. But then there's also a beautiful catharsis at the end.
The People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 17 minutes past 1. I should explain we're looking at Chelmsford Crown Court, where in around 10 minutes' time we're expecting a statement on the sentencing of Gavin Plumb, the man sentenced in the last few minutes for the attempted plot to kidnap, rape and murder television presenter Holly Willoughby.
Yes, indeed. So do stay with us for that. But in the meantime, US President Joe Biden is facing fresh calls to stand aside after what was a gaffe-ridden display at the NATO summit in Washington, including this particular mistake when welcoming Ukraine's President Zelensky onto the stage at the NATO summit.
And now I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
Well, if that wasn't bad enough, when asked a question about his vice president, Kamala Harris, he had this to say.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
It's really, really bad. And, of course, Joe Biden is no stranger to gaffes. What about the time he tried to shake hands with someone at the end of a speech who was not there before what looks like aimlessly wandering around the stage?
Or when he had to effectively be herded back to a group of leaders at the G7 this summer. He was herded back by the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, wandering off just last month.
Yes, this does seem to continue to happen. Now, Joe Biden continues to insist that he will be the Democrat candidate at November's presidential election. But after these latest gaffes, just how much longer can he realistically hold on for?
Well, let's get the thoughts now of the chair of Republicans overseas, Greg Swenson. Because, Greg, I suppose the Republicans might be slightly, on the one hand, revelling in the chaos in the Democratic Party, but on the other hand, worrying that someone more electable might be selected.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think we do worry about that. Of course, we want Biden to be the candidate. We'd even be happy with Kamala Harris as the candidate because it looks like President Trump would surely win against either one of those. The great unknown is if they can come up with a sort of a Hail Mary, desperate attempt to get someone else in there. And by the way, they've done this before. They did it with Biden 4 years ago. Bernie Sanders was clearly on the path to winning the nomination, but he was polling so poorly against Trump in the general election, and that really panicked the Democrats. Here we go, 4 years later, same thing is happening. They were sticking with him until a few months ago. All that's really changed is, two things, really. One is that the polling is really bad. His numbers have gone down. And secondly, the legacy media has finally admitted what they were denying for the last 3 years, or 4 years even. So, this is a big moment for the Democrats.
And what is it about Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, that makes him so committed to continuing on with this race? We're hearing more and more and more voices coming out to say, you know what, it's time to step aside. We need a different candidate for the Democrats. But yet he persists.
Yes, because he's defiant, he's angry, he's stubborn. This is a man who's wanted to be president his whole life and never really had a notable moment in his 40 years in the Senate. He was picked as vice president by Biden because Biden needed to balance the ticket with a Washington insider, with an older person, more of an establishment person, because in many ways, Obama had come out of nowhere in 2004. And so, this is a moment where, he's just digging his heels in and showing how shallow he is. It's really a sad moment. It's really going, not that he had much of a legacy anyway, but, he's going to go down in history as just this angry old man that refuses to step aside when that would be the right thing for his party and for his country.
Now, how would the process of dislodging Joe Biden actually take place? In early August, of course, there is the Democratic National Convention where a presumptive nominee becomes the official nominee. Yeah. Could it be that we would see the first contested convention for the Democratic side since 1980?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so many people were bailing on him, and you saw 3 more Democratic congressmen yesterday, as well as a senator, Peter Welch from Vermont. And so, this momentum is building. So there could be a contested one, but I think what would be more probable is they will convince him to step aside. So it won't necessarily be contested as, but they will have some challenges. I think the wise thing to do is not anoint somebody, not just hand the baton to Kamala or Gavin Newsom, but just have either a mini primary process or just like they used to do prior to 1972, all the nominations were done at the convention. So this would not be really outrageous. Yes, it's unprecedented in some ways, but this is how the system used to work. They would go to the convention, and the delegates from around the country would get in a smoke-filled room and argue and come out with a candidate. And so that's, I think, what I would recommend, rather than just handing the nomination to someone through anointing them.
And Greg, how significant is it that Hollywood has turned against him now?
It's really significant. Not that people care what Hollywood celebrities think. It's the fundraising. It's a great question because they are a money machine. That's where he gets considerable funding from. And so once George Clooney turned, that's a big moment. Not because he's a movie star or a celebrity. It's because he's a massive fundraiser. The last time they had a party a few weeks ago, hosted by George Clooney, and raised $30 million. So, this is a big advantage that Democrats have had over Republicans. They clearly were going to outraise President Trump in this cycle, but that's no longer the case. The fundraising dropped 50% since the fundraising pace dropped 50% since the debate.
Now, we're describing this as the gaffe-prone president, but is it not the case that of the last 4 presidents of the United States, 3/4 of them have been fairly gaffe-prone? I mean, I'm old enough to remember George W. Bush saying the French have no word for entrepreneur, or Donald Trump talking about powerful sunlight to defeat COVID, or bleach, or everything else. I mean, your system does tend to throw up people who are fairly gaffe-prone.
Yeah, well, they don't have the gift of oratory like we do in Great Britain, that's for sure. But I think you're probably referring. The exception was Obama, who did have a gift. And so, look, it's natural. These people are under a lot of stress, but this is apples and oranges. Biden compared to anybody else, it's just a no-brainer. And so, the bar has been lowered so much. Like this press conference yesterday, was viewed by some Democrats and some in the legacy media as a success, but it's only because the bar has been lowered so much. It's basically on the floor now. And in many ways, the diminished standard has really been created by Biden and the team around him. So, and even if he did have a good press conference, which is arguable, it's overshadowed by the gaffes, by calling Zelensky Putin, calling Vice President Kamala Harris Vice President Trump. I mean, I don't think anyone can bounce back from that, especially Biden with the condition that he's in. And this is a catastrophe for the Democrats, because they've avoided, by having a decent press conference, they've avoided the obvious. It's basically kicking the can down the road. If he had just fallen on his face at the press conference more than he did, then I think it would be over this weekend. But I think he'll hang on for a little bit longer. But I don't see any other path than replacing him.
OK, well, thank you very much for your time, as always. Greg Swinson, there, chair of Republicans overseas. Now we're just going to head over to Chelmsford Crown Court. A reminder that we're waiting for a statement there. We heard the sentencing a little bit earlier of Gavin Plumb, the 37-year-old who planned the most hideous plot, hatched a plot to kidnap, rape and murder Holly Willoughby. So we will be hearing a statement from outside that court imminently.
Yes, he was, of course, arrested after an undercover police officer, not from this country, but from the United States of America, gained his trust, began discussing with him his plans to kidnap Holly Willoughby, to rape and murder her, to torture her family and threaten her children. The most sordid and horrific plans that had not just been discussed with this undercover police officer, but by many other, as yet anonymous individuals as well, who were found through the dark web using messaging apps like WhatsApp and the Kik app to communicate this plot.
Well, joining us now is former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. Peter, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Listening to that sentence, this man, now criminal, sentenced to 15 years, 85 minimum on a life sentence. Shocking.
Yes, in fact, the details of his planning, some of them were so graphic that only the jury and certain accredited members of the press were allowed access to them, because they were so disturbing they can't be made public. This man's depravity knew no depths. And it is a matter of something which we should be hugely grateful for, that the undercover officer based in Minnesota in the US was monitoring this internet traffic, was able to pick up Plumb's dreadful plotting to murder Holly Willoughby, and therefore he was able to be arrested without any harm coming to her. I give ultimate praise to that undercover officer.
I was slightly concerned about this situation whereby it wasn't a British police officer who discovered this. We're relying on the expertise, perhaps the funding, of foreign police forces to find and prosecute our own domestic cases.
Yes, you raise a valid point, although there are undercover officers from British law enforcement doing similar jobs, predominantly around child sexual abuse images and the such like. But of course, the internet is utterly vast, and it cannot be policed in its entirety 24 hours a day. It does rightfully make us ask questions about how much other criminality is going on out there, which law enforcement are simply not aware of. But really, the bigger problem about this, and about so many of the crime stories that have been so utterly horrific this week, the problem is men. Young boys are being born, and from them, monsters are being created. Look at the levels of violence and the plots against women, all carried out by men. Men are the problem.
Well, what do we do about that then, Peter?
I think that's a perfectly valid question. And I think there must be issues around parenting, around education, and around society as a whole. I can't help but feel there is a crumbling of society, of values that are important to the moderate mainstream, to people that do raise wonderful children who become adults, who contribute to society. But there clearly is a swathe of people who do not. There are men who are becoming monsters. The reasons must be discovered, and therefore something can be done about it. But there's another very important issue here with regards to Gavin Plumb. On 2 previous occasions, he was sentenced for crimes against women. And ludicrously, on the first occasion, he got a suspended sentence. And on the second occasion, when he unlawfully imprisoned 2 girls in a storeroom, he got 32 months, of which he served only 16. They are ridiculous sentences. If he'd been sentenced to a more appropriate and longer jail term some time ago, maybe none of this plotting to rape, kidnap and murder Holly Willoughby would have occurred.
Peter, you raise an absolutely fantastic point there, because this is all in the context, of course, of a government that is likely to release thousands upon thousands of prisoners. Prisoners they would describe as serving minor sentences, but perhaps Gavin Plumb would have been described as serving a minor sentence when he was serving just 16 months for something that could well have easily been described to be non-violent. Obviously, it may well have had violent intentions without direct violence taking place on that occasion. I wonder if the answer to the question you raise about men and the section of men that are clearly a danger to society, is the answer not simply to lock them away?
Entirely. Long jail sentences actually work. And I say that because I tend to meet on a fairly frequent basis people who have served lengthy jail terms, so lengthy that they decided they never wanted to go back. And so they had a very good motivation to turn their lives around, become contributing members of society, and never again commit a crime. Long jail terms work. Short jail terms don't. What we need to focus on is sentencing people to appropriate, lengthy sentences, which means they can get the services.
Peter, we're just going to interrupt you because we're just going to head to the court.
Inspector Greg Wood.
Certainly.
Today, Gavin Plumb starts a life sentence with a minimum of 16 years, and the streets of Essex are safer as a result of his imprisonment. He's a dangerous individual with a history of kidnapping women and girls. He tried to claim throughout the trial that he was an obsessive fan and a fantasist. That is simply not true. He planned this attack on Miss Willoughby over a 2-year period, scoping her movements, seeking help from others, and buying items that would incapacitate and inflict violence. He is not a fantasist. He's a calculating sexual predator who has spent his adult life seeking to inflict violence on women. Today, I pay tribute to Miss Willoughby and the other women who Gavin Plumb sought to harm. Their bravery has helped us protect other women, and I thank them for their courage. This case has brought misogyny and violence against women and girls to the fore. It has demonstrated that we all have much to do to stamp it out of society. It cannot be right that men like Gavin Plumb are able to join online and plot to cause them harm. We need everyone to stand up and call out misogyny and to report those causing violence towards women and girls. Essex Police will do all we can to bring offenders like Gavin Plumb to justice and ensure women and girls in our county and beyond are free to go about their daily lives without fear of harm. Thank you.
OK, well, there we are outside the court hearing that short statement confirming he's not a fantasist, this man, a calculated sexual predator, and now Essex and women in general are safer as a result. His name is Greg Wood, DCI Greg Wood there from the Essex Police. That's who we were hearing from. But we'll turn back to Peter Blexley, who hopefully is still on the line for us. Fantastic stuff. Hearing this sentence, a lot of people are confused. A life sentence, but minimum of 15 years, 85 days. Why does life not mean life, Peter?
Well, there are very few people that are sentenced to a whole life tariff, which means, of course, that they would die in prison. And those sentences are reserved for the very, very worst offenders, people who kill multiple times, cases like that, for example. This man was sentenced to 16 years, minus the time that he's already served on remand awaiting trial. But his life sentence means that he will forever be on licence. Should he ever be released, and let's sincerely hope he isn't, but should he be released, he will be on licence. So the probation service will be able to impose restrictions upon him about where he lives, where he can go. And of course, he is also the subject of a sexual offences order. I know that still sounds unsatisfactory to many, including myself, because this jail term, in my mind, simply isn't long enough. But the judges' hands are tied. The Sentencing Council hands down guidelines that judges simply must abide by, because if they don't, they give the prisoners the opportunity to appeal against their sentences. And that, of course, is expensive and an unsatisfactory waste of valuable public resources.
Now, Peter, I must just say we are looking now at the extraordinary body cam footage of the moment that Essex Police arrested Gavin Plumb. It is chilling, really, to see him there within those rooms from which he communicated to many people using the dark web, but also kept restraints, kept what he thought to be chloroform, with which he would carry out this attempted kidnap, rape and murder.
I won't beat around the bush. He's a sad, pathetic, revolting creature. And I'm very glad that he'll spend at least 15 years and 85 days in jail. Let's hope it's considerably longer than that, because anybody that ever considers releasing this beast must look at his previous convictions. And unusually in this trial, or should I say, something that happens infrequently, is that the jury were told about his previous offending, because the facts of those crimes were so similar to the facts put before the jury for the Holly Willoughby plot. So
Peter, sorry to just jump in there, but I think a lot of people will be looking at his two previous arrests, the times that he attempted to kidnap 2 women on the Stansted Express, the times that he put more women under false imprisonment, his first suspended sentence, his latterly served 16 months in prison, and thinking, why on earth was this man freely roaming the dark web? Why on earth was this man not under greater surveillance? How on earth have we got to the state as a country where someone can be arrested, given a suspended sentence, and then arrested again, given another sentence, and now arrested for a 3rd time? What on earth is going on?
people are not getting long enough prison sentences, which are, should I say, the right sentences for the crimes that they commit. Clearly, there was an escalation in Plumb's offending from the first hideous crimes, and I heard about the testimony from a victim about the impact that that had on her when he handed a note to her in an extremely threatening manner on a train, telling her to get off with him at the next stop. A horrific thing to happen to a lone woman who therefore is very vulnerable when faced by this monster. He did the same again the following day. And then, years later, when he's working in what then was Woolworths, he kidnaps 2 young women, holds them in a stockroom and ties one up. It's astonishing to think that the escalation wasn't identified, that the increasing risks to the public wasn't identified, and that he wasn't sentenced accordingly. He was allowed to roam free to plot the dreadful crimes against Holly Willoughby because he hadn't been sentenced appropriately, he hadn't been punished properly in the past.
I mean, hearing about what this man wanted to do to her and her family must be absolutely terrifying for Holly Willoughby and traumatic. Thoughts with her and how she and her family dealt with this all. Absolutely disgusting, the details we heard during that sentencing. Thank you so much, Peter, for talking us through it all. You are, of course, a former Scotland Yard detective.
Well, goodness me, taking a deep breath now and coming up a truly shocking story about a man's hellish experience in a Dubai prison. Much more on that after this.
Hello, here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. There may be some brightness today, but also quite a bit of rain or even showers. These could turn heavy and thundery in the southwest. Looking at the bigger picture, and it's quite a messy story across much of the country, there are a couple of features bringing the focus for some showery rain across northwest Scotland. There's some drizzly rain here, and elsewhere there'll be some showery outbreaks. The heavier showers, though, will be across parts of southwest England, particularly southern Devon and Cornwall. Here, some slow-moving heavy thunderstorms are quite likely through this afternoon. Temperatures are generally going to be near normal or a little bit below average for the time of year, so feeling a bit cool for July, especially because there will be quite a lot of cloud around. Taking a closer look at this evening, and further drizzly rain affecting northwest Scotland, but a drier, perhaps brighter picture further east and south. Also quite a bit of cloud across much of Northern Ireland, a few outbreaks of rain here. Some thicker cloud and rain pushing into eastern parts of Scotland. Further south and in the southwest, we'll start to see those showers clearing away, but there could still be some heavy ones for a time this evening. Overnight then, that thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain will be pushing into some eastern parts. Further west, still some spells of rain to watch out for, and generally it is going to stay pretty cloudy. As a result, though, temperatures generally staying in double figures. Saturday then is going to be a cloudy, damp day across some eastern parts. Some brisk winds here adding to a rather cool feel as some rain feeds its way in from the North Sea. Further west and across central southern parts too, there will be a scattering of showers around, perhaps less likely to see thunder compared to today. Temperatures similar, still a bit disappointing for the time of year. Sunday does look like it will start off a bit brighter, but we could see a bit more cloud building as we go through the day, and there will be some showery outbreaks of rain around, but perhaps as a whole it does look like it will be a slightly drier day than today and tomorrow.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. There's a vehicle having a tyre change on the northbound M6, so a lane shut, pretty slow going too, around Lancaster northbound junction 33 up to 34. Then in Warwickshire, the southbound M6, 2 lanes are out from Coleshill junction 4 down toward Nuneaton and Coventry junction 3. There's a breakdown there in the process of being recovered, so it's causing delays. A collision being recovered southbound M23, so 2 lanes shut, and there's queues from the M25 junction 8 towards Gatwick Airport at 9. Staying in Surrey and Holmwood, the A24 northbound, that remains closed off for emergency repairs. That's away from the Bear Green roundabout. That's the A29 turn off up towards the Knoll roundabout in Leatherhead. That's queuing as well. Naturally, that's causing delays. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
OK, well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1:43 now, and for a truly shocking story about a man's experience in a hellish Dubai prison and why he's warning Brits to completely avoid the country.
Well, ex-Leeds Football Club chief executive and human rights lawyer David Hay spent 22 months locked up behind bars where he was subjected to torture and sexual assault.
David, thank you very much indeed for joining us, David Hay. We usually have you on to talk about things like stopping the boats and immigration law and the like, but we read your story in the Mail Online and it is truly shocking. Had no idea this had happened to you. Tell us a bit about how you ended up in a Dubai prison.
Hi. Good afternoon to you both. I mean, my story, it happened 10 years ago now, but the reason why it's come back into the media is there was a young Irish lady who was cabin crew, and she basically had some issues in Dubai recently, and she was facing jail for drinking alcohol and attempted suicide. So I think a lot of the newspapers, the Mail and the Sun, decided to focus on other people that have suffered things in the country in the last few years, and obviously I was one of the most high-profile cases 10 years ago. And what happened to me, Emily? Effectively, I was running Leeds United, dream job for many. Had a dispute with my then employers, who said, come to Dubai, we'll sort everything out. I quite happily get on a plane, a very nice Emirates suite, land, and a few hours later I'm on the floor of a police station with men with guns screaming and shouting at me in Arabic, trying to get me to sign a false confession. And that ordeal lasted 22 months in all. 15 months I was held in what we would call arbitrary detention, which is no one told me really why I was there. I had no investigation, just 15 months shoved in a hole and the door locked. And then, I was very lucky. The picture that you're seeing now, that was smuggled out effectively through a police officer and put in the Daily Mail. And once that story got out, I think a few days later, I was charged with an offence called breach of trust and then found guilty of it and then pardoned 9 days later. I was then due to come home, and then another charge was filed against me, another so-called criminal charge for Twitter abuse while I was locked up. There wasn't even phones, so it's absurd that I somehow managed to abuse people on Twitter. So I was jailed for another 9 months for Twitter abuse, of which I was acquitted. So, 22 months of hell, and then eventually got back on Good Friday in 2016 to a rather blaze of publicity. So that's kind of how it happened. Not a nice experience.
No, it seems just extraordinary, it seems arbitrary, it seems everything that the justice system in the United Kingdom is not. Do you have a message for those who are thinking of going on holiday in Dubai, thinking of doing business in Dubai? Is it possible to do so safely?
I think the short answer to that is effectively no. From 10 years ago, and obviously with the profile that I had then, and what I now do, I help other victims of injustices and human rights abuses in Dubai. That's not just tourists that go there. It's not just expats that live there. As many of your viewers will know, that I worked for the daughter of the ruler of Dubai, a lady called Princess Latifah. I helped her get her freedom. So, it is a dangerous place no matter who you are. The problem that you've got is that it really is marketed as this glamorous party capital of the Middle East, when the reality is it's not. It's got very strict Sharia-based laws, very similar to how you would have them in Saudi. None of us, I'm sure, would think about going on a party holiday to Saudi. Dubai has the same type of laws. So I'll give you an example. If you go into a hotel room with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, you're not married, you are breaking the law. And how many of these influencers that we see on Instagram and footballers and their girlfriends do that day in, day out? It's a very dangerous place, but no one sees the danger until it happens to them.
And David, reading the article in the Mail and hearing what happened to you, sexual assault, punched, tasered, hit with a broom handle while you were incarcerated. You say you saw a man tortured to death. Can you just describe a little, the trauma you went through?
It's something that never leaves you. And, as the article said, I've spent a lot of time in hospital recovering from that. And in a weird way, you can kind of, when someone abuses you, when someone punches you and does terrible things to you, you can kind of tolerate that. But what I've found and still find really difficult is when you see the police hurting other people and torturing other people. And there's, it's mentioned in the article, one person that they were beating and torturing that was lying next to me, and they stood on his throat and dragged him off, sounded like he wasn't breathing. And it's something that even now, 10 years later, you always think, what happened to that person? So, that's why I do the work that I do now, because when you've gone through that situation, I was lucky. I had a profile and I could talk. Once I managed to get to the media, I've got something of a big mouth, and I didn't stop for the last 10 years talking about what happened to me and then helping others. And that's by doing that, I hope that I'll protect some people that are there and help people that might go there that will suddenly think twice. It was a horrific experience, Emily, but it's one that through the work that I've done, particularly when I look at people like Princess Latifa and Princess Haya, who was Latifa's stepmother, who I helped to get to safety. From something dark and horrible, something good has come. So that's why I do the work that I do now.
And this was a big turning point in your life. Did sort of that experience, those months in that horrible situation in that cell, not knowing sort of what rights you had, if any, not knowing when you might be coming back home, I suppose that inspired you for a pretty sharp change in career.
Well, absolutely. Before that, I was, if you like, an evil corporate lawyer working in private equity and running a football club. So, that's one of those kind of life-changing moments when you're in, when someone throws you in a hellhole in a foreign country, slams the door shut, and no one's helping you. Even the embassy was useless. You kind of have moments to think about your life and what you want to do with it. And then, I was in the fortunate situation, like I said, that because I ran a football club, I managed to get, some attention, some press, and I could help other people because, if I spoke about their cases, it would get in the press. So, it's something, a lot of people ask me, would I change what happened? And it might sound extreme to say it, but I probably wouldn't, because the amount of people I've helped, whether they're princesses or they're just, everyday normal people in the last 10 years, I think, that's so valuable. And hopefully, we'll see, and we are seeing changes in the way that Dubai and other countries in the Gulf where I help treat the people. They are taking notice. They do know that they need to change these archaic laws and bring, real justice, human rights into them. So I think that's a positive.
For most of us living in Britain, it's hard to imagine the hell you went through. Is your mental health still suffering from this? Have you had, a trauma as a result of this?
I think it never leaves you. The gentleman that I mentioned where I saw them, what I believe to have, killed someone, literally lying next to me, that's something that never really goes. I've had a lot of treatment, the one called EMDR and various other things that they do, but I don't think you ever fully recover when you've seen such horrors. But then, like I said, for me, the way that I kind of treat myself, if you like, is helping other people and seeing the joy and the happiness that they get from when I can help them. But I don't think anyone really recovers when you see something like that. But if you can get a positive from those very dark moments, I think that's the best thing that you can do.
David, it really stings at my sense of justice and fairness that it tends to be cases that can get media attention are the ones that international embassies then rush to try and solve. Is it really that inequitable that so often in these cases you have to get it into a paper, you have to get it on the television before the work to sort it out actually begins in earnest?
Absolutely. In my case, if it hadn't got if it wasn't for the Daily Mail, if it wasn't for the BBC back then, I could have been dead. This young Irish lady, if she hadn't have got it in the press, she could not be with us now. Even Princess Latifa, if and again, it was the Sun and the Daily Mail that ran that story in 2018 when no other media wanted to. If that hadn't have happened, she could be dead. It's only this particular country and this area, the only thing they really care about is their reputation, because they need they need our tourists, they need the expats, they need the investment, coming this way as well. So they care about their reputation. And if you leave it to the embassy, particularly in the British embassy and the Foreign Office, in my case and in all the other cases that I help on relating to Brits, they're useless. And they actually do more than that in the fact they tell people don't go to the media. And it's only usually when people do that, and you see the ridiculousness of some of cases, many Brits getting arrested for having drinks in a bar. There was a chap called Lee Bradley Brown who went there a decade ago as a tourist. He was murdered by the police. There was an inquest a couple of years ago, which your viewers, if they Google, you'll be able to read about him. So it's only when you get to the media get that justice at the moment. And one of the good things for this young lady from Ireland, and something that I was really impressed with her government, is her government, and this is very unusual, very quickly stood up and said, bring her home, we're not accepting this. I've never seen the English government or the Foreign Office do that or other. So all credit to the Irish government for protecting this young lady and for getting her home.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really interesting to get your story, and we wish you best and with your health and everything going forward. Thank you very much, David Haig. Good to speak to you. Shocking, really. I think a lot of people go to Dubai and perhaps are a little naive that actually the law is very different over there, and they assume because they're Brits and, you know, that they can just go over there and they see the only way is Essex lot all over there, you know, in their bikinis and all that. You have to be careful.
Deeply irresponsible influencers and sort of online image creation. I suppose it just goes to show that you should really read up on the law of any country you do go to, because if you toe out of line, there can be very serious repercussions.
Absolutely. Well, coming up, we're going to be discussing President Joe Biden. Just how can he carry on as president following his latest gaffe? Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. It is going to be a bit messy as we go into this weekend. There'll be some rain, some showers around, and a glimmer of sunshine at times. Looking at the bigger picture, and there is high pressure just to the west of us, but also various features bringing some showery rain for some too. In the southwest, watch out for some heavy thundery downpours as we head towards this evening. Could cause some localised issues. Elsewhere, there'll be some clouds, some showery rain. Some thicker cloud brings some more persistent rain to eastern parts of England as that pushes in from the North Sea. Perhaps a little bit drier further west, still some spots of rain around. A lot of cloud though, so temperatures generally holding up in double figures, especially in the towns and cities. Through tomorrow morning then, a damp picture across eastern parts, further outbreaks of rain here. In the south though, any showers will have cleared overnight, so it's a mostly dry picture here in the southwest. Some sunshine earlier on, cloudier further east. Further outbreaks of showery rain as we head further northwards. Always brightest the further west you go because of that high pressure that I mentioned earlier. Further east, it is always going to be that bit cloudier, that bit damper, and there'll be some blustery winds to watch out for too. Little change as we go through the rest of the day. We are going to see that rain across eastern parts pushing a bit further west, and so more places likely to turn a little bit damper, but further west still some bright or sunny spells and just a few showers to watch out for. Some of those showers could be heavy, possibly thundery, but not looking as intense as those that we've seen today. Temperatures are going to be a little bit below average for the time of year and feeling pretty cool towards those eastern coastal parts because of the cloud, the rain and those brisk winds. More rain pushing in from the North Sea as we go through later Saturday into Sunday. Elsewhere staying largely dry, some bright sunny spells, and in fact Sunday doesn't look too bad, just a few showers to watch out for before more rain arrives in time for the beginning of next week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
£30,000 in cash has to be won. It's our biggest cash prize so far, and it could be yours. Phil was a winner. Listen to what he says about winning the Great British Giveaway.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox. I just looked at my account and thought, oh my God, yeah, it's true, it's gone into my account. And if I can win it, anybody can win it.
The next big winner could be you, with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody
in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said stump.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 12th of July. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Gavin Plumb, the man found guilty of hatching depraved and vile plans to kidnap, rape and murder TV star Holly Willoughby, has been sentenced to a minimum of 15 years and 85 days in prison. We're live in Chelmsford Crown Court.
And deaths in the Channel. 4 more migrants have died after attempting to cross the dangerous 26-mile shipping lane that is the English Channel. We'll have the latest from France and ask if smashing the gangs is a viable strategy to save lives.
Will Joe go? As the leader of the free world confuses Volodymyr Zelensky for Vladimir Putin and calls Kamala Harris Vice President Trump, panic is spreading across Capitol Hill, with leading Democrats now thinking the unthinkable.
And Tom wants to know this afternoon why the weather's so shoddy in July. And we asked the same question in June. Yes, it has been a bit rubbish, hasn't it?
I know everyone's going to pillory me for this, but, isn't it supposed to be getting warmer?
I mean, that's what we've been taught.
Well, I'm not suggesting that the climate isn't heating up, but you'd have thought that there might be, some benefits to that. Clearly not. Clearly not. I mean, this is July and it feels like November, December. I mean, it's awful.
It is pretty awful. We've had rain. The temperature hasn't really gone above much beyond about 20 degrees for weeks.
We've had little isolated spots of a warm day here or there, or, a warm weekend.
Yes, to be fair, actually, 2 days ago, it was quite sunny down here, wasn't it?
But then...
Maybe we're just imagining... I think we're just imagining, some July. Now, I can compare, because my birthday is in July, and I've had it boiling hot, I've had it cold and raining, I've had it boiling hot, cold and raining. Maybe this is just normal. People need to get over it. It's just the weather. It's what it does. It changes.
It does change, but I've seen reports that this is an unusually cold July. This is an unusually
I saw reports that it was unusually hot July.
That was June. June was unusually hot, apparently, although I'm not sure if
when you were sleeping. Anyway, we're going to get some expert analysis of that.
Not just us pontificating.
Not just us pontificating about that. gbnews.com/your say. Please do get in touch. It's been quite a heavy show today with all the news around crime and punishment. So, we've got to chat a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk about the weather as well.
Headlines with Sophia.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. At 2 minutes past 2, Your top story this hour. As you've been hearing, a man who plotted to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 15 years in prison. 37-year-old security guard Gavin Plumb from Harlow in Essex was arrested and charged after he disclosed his plans online to an undercover police officer in the US. During the sentencing hearing, the judge, Mr. Justice Edward Murray, praised the courage of Holly Willoughby and said no woman should feel unsafe due to their gender. The officer in charge of the case spoke outside Chelmsford Crown Court.
Planned this attack on Miss Willoughby over a 2-year period, scoping her movements, seeking help from others and buying items that would incapacitate and inflict violence. He is not a fantasist. He's a calculating sexual predator who has spent his adult life seeking to inflict violence on women.
A 26-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murders of 3 women in Hertfordshire. 61-year-old Carol Hunt and her 2 daughters, 25-year-old Louise and Hannah, who's 28, were attacked at their home in Bushey. Hertfordshire police say the main suspect has been treated for injuries in hospital since then, but was only arrested today. He remains in a serious condition. The deaths of 4 migrants in the English Channel are truly awful. That's according to the Home Secretary. Yvette Cooper's comments came as the migrants drowned after their boat capsized. The French Coast Guard says more than 60 people were reported to be on the boat off the northern coast near Boulogne. Latest Home Office figures show 419 people made the journey across the Channel from France to the UK in 6 boats on Tuesday. It suggests an average of around 70 people per boat, taking the provisional total for 2024 to just over 14,000. Violent prisoners could be released early under new government measures to tackle overcrowding in prisons. The Justice Secretary is set to announce emergency plans amid fears jails will run out of space within weeks. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has said that the shocking crisis is worse than he had first feared. It is expected that prisoners could receive early release after 40% of their sentences served. Currently, it stands at 50%. But former Justice Minister Sir Robert Buckland says Labour can't just blame the previous government.
The government just merely points the finger at its predecessor and doesn't come up with other ideas about how to reduce the population awaiting trial, the remand population, then I think it will have missed an opportunity. And I think it's important that viewers know that we should be looking very carefully to make sure that serious violent criminals should not be released. And anybody on this scheme shouldn't be a domestic abuser or a stalker or an offender of that nature, because we should be maintaining confidence and making sure the public aren't put at risk.
And we show you some pictures now of the Princess Royal, who's making her first public appearance since she suffered concussion on her estate. She's at Hartpury University in Gloucestershire, and she can be seen here talking to the people. US President Joe Biden has vowed to fight on despite 2 major gaffes at the NATO summit and a growing number of Democrats calling on him to stand aside. Speaking at the Washington event last night, he mistakenly referred to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as President Putin before correcting himself.
Ukraine will prevail in this war, and we'll stand with them every single step of the way. That's what the compact says, loudly and clearly. And now I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway.
Speaking just a short while later, while taking questions from journalists, he mixed up the names of Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
But despite his 2 mistakes, Sir Keir Starmer has defended Joe Biden's leadership of the NATO summit. The Prime Minister, who earlier insisted Mr Biden was not senile and was on good form, faced questions about the President's mental ability just moments after the US leader's gaffe. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2. Now, Gavin Plumb, the man found guilty of hatching depraved and vile plans to kidnap, rape and murder TV star Holly Willoughby, he's been sentenced to a minimum of 15 years and 85 days in prison.
Well, let's cross to Chelmsford Crown Court and speak with GB News national reporter Theo Jacomba. Some of the details in that sentencing were truly shocking.
They were indeed, and the court heard today that Gavin Plumb, 37-year-old, who's a security guard from Harlow in Essex, had been planning this attack for over 2 years. He was found guilty of plotting to rape, murder and kill a TV presenter, Holly Willoughby. Now, by his own admission, Plumb said he was a loner and that he spent time and he ended up getting obsessed with the TV presenter, and that led to him going online and speaking to what he didn't know at the time as an undercover officer in the US on the social media app called Kik. Now, this conversation went on for some time. They exchanged messages. He had posted pictures of Miss Willoughby on there, and then he went on to explain what he wanted to do as part of this attack. Now, David Nelson, not his real name, had also given evidence anonymously as the undercover officer as part of this trial, a trial which lasted 8 days. And we understand that Mr. Plumb had been remanded in custody for around 280 days. Now, in terms of what we heard in court today, the prosecutor added that Mr. Plumb had been researching Miss Holly Willoughby's movements, looking where she lived, trying to gain knowledge about whether she had CCTV footage or not. And this was all part of a plan to what she described as a plan to abduct and kill. Now, we also heard from Sasha Was, who is Plumb's barrister, who said the defendant is embarrassed and ashamed about the details of the online conversations that he had, and he didn't expect them to come out and that they would remain private. Now, she went on to add just before the judge announced this sentencing that it should have been looked at in terms of offences of planning, which did not take place, and that nothing was actually done. But in the last half an hour or so, we did hear from the Detective Chief Inspector Greg Wood just over there on my right shoulder where the police station is, and he said this cannot be right for men to have access to forums where they plan to cause harm to girls and women. But what we can say today is that he has been sentenced to 15 years and 85 days as a minimum.
Well, Theo Jacomba, thank you very much for bringing us that outside Chelmsford Crown Court. Deeply serious case with huge ramifications.
And as we were discussing, this was by no means his first offence. Questions may be asked as to why he was out living his life as normal.
Yeah, this could have been caught so much earlier. He was first arrested attempting to kidnap women, holding an imitation firearm on the Stansted Express, passing notes to women saying, "I'm a police officer, get off with me at the next station." Thank goodness none of them did. He was then later arrested again. He got a suspended sentence for that. He was later arrested again after this time actually false imprisoning 2 16-year-old girls, tying one up, holding them at knife point. Thank goodness one of the other escaped and raised the alarm. He served just 16 months in prison for that. And then this, a third occasion, a third sentencing. How many times do people need to be caught, arrested, sentenced, convicted and released in order for the system to get the message? Stop releasing these dangerous criminals.
Putting women and the public in general just at so much risk. And the judge, in his sentencing remarks, those are mitigating factors of which there weren't many, one of them being that because he's so grossly obese, he may not have been able to actually physically go through with his plan, but we know that he was looking for accomplices to help him. Fortunately, he wasn't able to follow through with that. Also, the fact he didn't have a driving licence, he couldn't drive a car, was one of those other mitigating factors. But apart from that, he was so many aggravations to this.
But do get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. Do you think 15 years and 85 days as a minimum sentence is frankly long enough?
Should life mean life? That's the question we always come back to, isn't it? When we hear these sentences with a minimum term up for parole, will they be let out? Will they even serve their whole sentence? These questions always in our justice system. But we're going to move on to something lighter, although perhaps it's a little dreary, the weather. And why it's been quite so rubbish. It is, of course, meant to be July, which is considered by most to be a summer month.
Yes, the UK has endured grey skies and wet floors for the most, or indeed pavements, grounds, grass, for the most of the last 2 months, with even some of us feeling the chill with temperatures below 20 degrees. So when will it get warmer?
Well, who better to ask than meteorologist John Ketley. John, why has the weather been so miserable?
Good afternoon, both of you. Well, isn't it strange? I always think that Wimbledon is a sort of benchmark as to how the summer is and how it's going to pan out. But even yesterday, although it was the warmest day of the championship so far at Wimbledon, it got to 24 degrees. What happened afterwards? There was a big downpour in the middle of central London yesterday evening. I don't know if you got caught in it, but there was some torrential rainfall. So it just can't settle down at the moment. I'm afraid it's all to do with this dreaded jet stream, which is not in the place we'd like it to be. Instead of feeding in lovely, warm, sunny weather from southern Europe, we keep getting a cool northerly wind out from the Atlantic. And that's the main reason. It's a bit technical, it's a bit boring to talk about it like that, but unless we get the high-pressure moving position and we start to feed in much hotter air from the south, then I'm afraid we're going to stay very unsettled and changeable for the time being. But it's not that unusual, it has to be said. Most of our summers are pretty ordinary. I think we've been lulled into a false sense of security in the past 6 years, say. We had that very hot spell in July 18 and again in July 19, and we had those record-breaking temperatures just a couple of years ago when we got to 40 degrees. That really isn't the norm. That's exceptional. And generally speaking, our summers are pretty boring.
It's really messing with us, this jet stream.
It really is.
Ruining our day.
I'm very concerned about it, though, because there are all sorts of forecasts about whether or not the jet stream will continue into the future. I mean, our climate relies on this jet stream. Is this a sort of one-off, or is this perhaps something we should be more concerned about?
Well, I think, in my opinion, having been doing this job for so many years, I think this is more the norm than the extreme temperatures that we've had to see in the last few years, you know. It isn't in a position which is unusual, but we do like it to be in a different position. And it's always vacillating. It's always changing its amplitude and all that kind of thing. It's always changing its wavelength, if you want to call it that. It's a sinusoidal pattern of winds in the upper atmosphere, which is always on the move. And sadly, it's just not settling down in the right place at the moment. But we can go back to heat waves in the past, say 21 years ago, 2003, but extremely hot weather in the well, parts of July, but particularly into August. And then in 2006, we had a very, very hot 2006 in July. So we had these hot conditions, and then everybody started talking about this being the norm. Well, what happened after that? We had some extremely wet summers in 2007, 8, 9, 12, you can name it. Lots of very poor summers after that. So there's nothing typical about a British summer. People say it's unpredictable. I don't believe that. I think we can always forecast it, but it's unreliable, and that's the trouble.
Well, we've still got August to look forward to. Yes. Perhaps a warm September. September's usually quite nice, at least the first week. So, you know, it's not all over yet. We'll just
I believe that, actually. Emily, I would agree with that, I think, because it's been so dire so far. If nothing else, we can actually go for the law of averages and say, well, the good weather's got to come at some point. So August into September, let's go for that, yeah.
The law of averages.
Sorry, are we basing this on anything other than probability?
Yeah.
Is there any meteorological assessment to think that this could be a warmer September?
There's nothing wrong with probabilities, Tom. Nothing wrong with probabilities at all. If everything else fails, go for that. And we can also look at patterns of weather in previous decades as well. And that's the way things have been going. We've seen, generally speaking, poor summers, just extremely hot ones occasionally. So this is much more the norm. I think we've been used to going back down to the Mediterranean for our summer holidays and thinking the weather's going to be exactly the same when you come back home. It very rarely is. And I think, generally speaking, although we will get some much, much nicer weather in the next 2 months. We will. I can promise you that.
We will. I can feel it.
But it's not reliable.
Well, I'm happy because the sun shone on my wedding, and you know that's all I can ask for. Anyway, thank you, John Ketley, meteorologist.
My pleasure.
Great to have you on. Good stuff.
It's good to have an optimistic meteorologist.
The law of averages is fine.
No, I think I'm just hoping that it's really wet and miserable in August for the 2 weeks when I'm abroad. And
yes,
if it's
that's
sunny
always nice.
Because I just know, knowing my luck, I'm going to fly away, and that's going to be the time that England gets all the sun.
It does happen quite a lot, actually, when you book somewhere to get the sun and then it's just as nice in the UK. But there's not so many beaches to frolic on, perhaps. No. Yes, well, we're going to turn to the United States because President Joe Biden, well, the gaffes keep coming. He's a particularly bad one yesterday, confusing Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, for Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. So an ally for a foe there. Very embarrassing, very awkward for those in the room. We've been discussing how long Biden can really continue on.
Well, let's turn this question to GB News reporter Charlie Peters, because, Charlie, I suppose he's under more scrutiny than he has ever been before on this question of gaffes.
Yes, and this NATO summit in Washington was seen as a big opportunity for Biden to rescue his presidency after the debate on the 27th of June, which his own team have described as being a bad day. He had a bad day, is what the press secretary in the White House said, and the wider kind of Democrat media alliances have also said that it was disastrous, so a very negative turn since then. This press conference in particular last night was seen as a pivotal moment because so many of his media appearances in recent weeks, particularly since June the 27th, have been with teleprompters. It's been supported. He's had cue cards. Last night, it was him on his own going free at it. And in that, he's obviously let himself down in some way. We've also got a clip, I think, of his cabinet reacting to him describing Zelensky, no, not Zelensky as Putin, but rather describing Kamala Harris as Vice President Trump.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be President. So let's start there. Number one.
Well, even I got the gaffes mixed up there. But for those listening on the radio, you've got Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Then you also have the Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin. And at the back, it's Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. Now, Lloyd Austin stays pretty steely-eyed throughout. But Blinken, you can see him look down, reacting in shock to that line. And Jake Sullivan brings his hand to his mouth and looks to the floor as it happens. So they've reacted quite strongly to that incident. The cameras obviously pinged on them constantly during these moments. Now, while this is going on, about 20 congressional Democrats have said that they want Biden to drop out. That's a big number. One senator, Peter Welch from Vermont. But it's who's not going public that's attracting a lot of commentary at the moment. We do know that former President Barack Obama and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi are understood to be having private conversations about their concerns, about how much more difficult it's now becoming for Biden to defeat Trump in November. At the same time, other outlets in the US reporting that there is now a growing unofficial committee to unelect the president from veteran Democrats who are organising hourly, speaking to donors. One major donor who's spoken out in the last week is George Clooney, the actor. Now, just last month, on the 16th of June, he held a major fundraiser in Hollywood alongside Julia Roberts, his on-screen co-star, and Barack Obama, that former president. Well, this week, he raised $30 million at that event in Tinseltown. But this week, he's written in the New York Times urging Biden to step down, saying that he's not the man he knew in 2010, not even the man he knew in 2020. His legacy is secured, many Democrats say. He defeated Trump in that most recent election. But now, many are publicly saying, and it appears also privately as well, that he has to step down now.
Well, let's have a look at some of these other gaffes that have been going on, because, of course, this wasn't the first one. Joe Biden went to shake the hand of someone on stage not so long ago, only to realise there was no one on stage, to turn around looking lost. But looking lost isn't the only time that we've seen that either. At the G7 in Italy only last month, he starts wandering off while the rest of those G7 leaders were stood together. He has to be pulled back by the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. People are starting to see, frankly, what the Republicans have been saying for some years now.
Republicans and also many members of the public. I mean, before this incident on the 27th, a lot of registered voters did suggest that Biden wasn't prepared. But also, we need to think about what's the Republican reaction to this now. Because Trump let slip almost earlier this week, and this hasn't been picked up on so much. He said, we planned for Biden. I think it's quite clear now that the GOP wants Biden to stay in place. And it's looking increasingly likely now, the odds put Kamala Harris, the vice president, to replace Biden before the DNC, before the convention in August, when the delegates will select President Biden. But it's not clear whether or not that's a situation that would favour Trump and the Republicans, they're increasingly of the view that they'll beat Biden. They want him to stay in the race.
Well, it's very interesting indeed. Thank you so much, Charlie Peters, GB News reporter. Now, coming up, we're going to be hearing from Ollie Watkins, the scorer in that match with the Netherlands. He's going to be telling us, updating us at this press conference. There you go. We are waiting patiently. That'll be up next after the break.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
No, it wasn't just us who celebrated the big football match on Saturday. Prince William was in the crowd in Dusseldorf and couldn't help but show his relief when England scored.
And over the weekend, it was also announced that the Prince of Wales is set to star in a new two-part documentary on ITV covering his mission to try and eradicate homelessness.
Well, let's talk about this and much, much more with Angela Levin, royal biographer, who joins us in the studio. I'm glad to hear that this documentary's been made, Angela, because I worried that he made this big announcement about homelessness and I thought, goodness me, here is somebody who could maybe do something about this. And then it's all seemed to have gone quiet.
He's been very busy with it, actually. He's gone all over the country to see different areas and how they have been, and to try and change people's attitude to homelessness, that they're people who need help and want to get back into a normal life. I think it was 2009, he slept out in the street to see for himself what it was like. And he also helps people who are selling the magazines, the big issue. So I think he was actually just covering the basic about what it was like for him and how he can now help other people. He and Catherine are putting £3 million straight away into that, and it's going to
Where
be...
Where does that money come from?
Their own foundation, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not taking it from our tax or anybody else's. He wants to do this so badly because of his mother. You know, she took them to see people who were homeless, and even if he can't do everyone, he can help people be kind and understanding.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 2. What we're looking at is the preparations for a big press conference from the England team in Germany, of course, ahead of our Cup final on Sunday. We're going to be hearing from Ollie Watkins in just a few moments' time.
I am so excited for Sunday. It's going to be a mega match, the most mega of matches ever.
Do you think we're going to win?
Absolutely we are, Tom. Never doubt it.
Never doubt.
You may have doubted Scotland's performance.
I was right to.
Which was a bit mean, But England are going to storm ahead and they're going to take it home.
We like being the underdogs, I think. I think a lot of people think that Spain have been a very consistent performer over the course of this tournament, but England maybe being a consistent performer isn't what we need. We need to be an erratic and surprising performer.
Plucky is another word for it.
Yeah.
Plucky, full of beans, full of inspiration and aspiration. It's going to be great. But yes, we will bring you straight back to this press conference when Ollie Watkins takes his seat.
But something quite different now. 4 migrants have died whilst crossing the English Channel this morning, capsizing off the northern French coast near Boulogne-sur-Mer early this morning.
Yes, according to French Coast Guard, 63 migrants were rescued in this operation, but the Home Secretary has called this incident truly, truly awful.
Well, let's discuss this with our GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster, because, Catherine, this is something, of course, that the Home Office hasn't directly dealt with. It was the French that picked this boat up. But what have the British government had to say about it?
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon, Tom and Emily. And a reminder that this problem that so dogged Rishi Sunak is continuing under the new Labour government now. Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, saying on X, the further loss of life in the Channel is truly awful. My thoughts are with all those affected. Going on to say criminal gangs are making vast profit from putting lives at risk. We are accelerating action with international partners to pursue and bring down dangerous smuggler gangs. So, of course, 4 people tragically died near the coast of France last night. That follows 5 who died, including a child just back in April. And we know that over 400 people came across just on Tuesday on 6 boats. And this year, so far, over 14,000 people have made that dangerous crossing. Now, of course, it was a challenge that Rishi Sunak didn't manage to stop the boats as he promised. The new government hasn't made that pledge at all, but it has said it's going to crack down on the gangs. But, you know, the past government was trying to do that anyway, and they thought, the deterrent of Rwanda. They had promised that if they'd been elected, flights would have started to take off this month. Now, Labour were never having any truck with it. They thought it was a gimmick. They've scrapped it immediately. And Rwanda are basically saying there'll be no refund of the £270 million that's already gone to that country, because they're describing this basically as a United Kingdom problem. So a lot of money been spent. And of course, where is the deterrent now? I asked Sir Keir Starmer a couple of weeks ago what deterrent there was if you took away Rwanda while he was still on the election trail. And he said, stopping the gangs, that is the deterrent. I'm not sure that's quite right. I mean, stopping the gangs, if it was easy, yes, of course, we would want to do that. But, you know, work has been going on this and across Europe for some time. But trying to reduce the pull factors that encourage people to cross the whole of Europe and then decide to make that crossing to get to England. You know, Rwanda, in theory, and OK, lots of people thought nobody would ever go, and they were proved right. But the theory was, if you came here, you would be sent packing on a one-way ticket to Rwanda. You would not be coming back. And that once hundreds of people had been sent, then people would stop and think, actually, they'd rather stay in France. Without that, it's very, very difficult. And this border security command that Labour are talking about, they've already run into a bit of trouble because they did want Neil Basu, who had used to be the UK counter-terrorism head. They really had hoped that he would apply to head up that force, but he has declined the opportunity to apply. There is really nothing easy about stopping these boats under Labour, just as there was nothing easy about it under the Conservative government.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much, Catherine Forster, our GB News political correspondent there, live from Westminster. And Catherine's quite right. There is no deterrent now.
No, of course.
Besides putting your life at risk, and we see thousands of people are willing to do that.
Although Labour might argue what deterrent was Rwanda. Of course, it never got up and running, but even the threat of Rwanda, which sometimes government advisers claimed the threat was reducing boat numbers, and then it turned out that it wasn't. It was just weather often that was reducing.
We can't say, can we? We can't say because it didn't get off the ground. didn't get off the ground. The flights never took off. That scheme is now dead in the water, never happening, at least under this government. So what will the deterrent be? Will there just simply not be one? We know the boats continue to come, and unfortunately more people will lose their lives as a result. And it will cost our country masses in money. So there you go. Can't be an insolvable problem.
Well, in cheerier news, we're going to be live at the press conference in Germany ahead of that final, I should say, on Sunday. Ollie Watkins, the semi-final hero, will be speaking. That's after your headlines with Sophia.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just after 2:30. Your headlines. Leading the news this afternoon, a man who plotted to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 15 years in prison. 37-year-old security guard Gavin Plumb from Harlow in Essex was arrested and charged after he disclosed his plans online to an undercover police officer in the US. During the sentencing hearing, the judge, Mr. Justice Edward Murray, praised the courage of Holly Willoughby and said no woman should feel unsafe due to their gender. A 26-year-old man has now been arrested on suspicion of the murders of 3 women in Hertfordshire. 61-year-old Carol Hunt and her 2 daughters, 25-year-old Louise and Hannah, who's 28, were attacked at their home in Bushey. Hertfordshire police say the main suspect has been treated for injuries in hospital since then, but was only arrested today. He remains in a serious condition. In Bristol, a taxi's been seized as part of a manhunt after 2 suitcases containing human remains were left at Clifton Suspension Bridge. Police say it's their immediate priority to trace their main suspect and have released a description of someone seen on CCTV last night. He travelled to the bridge via taxi and dropped off the luggage. There's been no details so far about potential victims or a motive. And thousands of prisoners are to be released earlier than planned as the government attempts to avert the collapse of the prison system. The Justice Secretary is announcing emergency plans amid fears jails will run out of space within weeks. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has said that the shocking crisis is worse than he had first feared. It is expected that prisoners could receive early release after 40% of their sentences served. Currently, it stands at 50%. But former Justice Minister Sir Robert Buckland says Labour can't just blame the previous government. And finally, royal news. The Princess Royal has begun her first public engagement since suffering concussion after she was believed to have been struck by a horse. Anne, who's 73, spent 5 nights in hospital after the accident while out walking on her estate earlier this month. It is understood the visit to Hatbury College in Gloucestershire is her first step in a phased return to public duties as she continues her recovery. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. There may be some brightness today, but also quite a bit of rain or even showers. These could turn heavy and thundery in the southwest. Looking at the bigger picture, and it's quite a messy story across much of the country. There are a couple of features bringing the focus for some showery rain across northwest Scotland. There's some drizzly rain here, and elsewhere there'll be some showery outbreaks. The heaviest showers, though, will be across parts of southwest England, particularly southern Devon and Cornwall. Here, some slow-moving heavy thunderstorms are quite likely through this afternoon. Temperatures are generally going to be near normal or a little bit below average for the time of year, so feeling a bit cool for July, especially because there will be quite a lot of cloud around. Taking a closer look at this evening, and further drizzly rain affecting northwest Scotland, but a drier, perhaps brighter picture further east and south. Also quite a bit of cloud across much of Northern Ireland, a few outbreaks of rain here. Some thicker cloud and rain pushing into eastern parts of Scotland. Further south and in the southwest, we'll start to see those showers clearing away, but there could still be some heavy ones for a time this evening. Overnight then, that thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain will be pushing into some eastern parts. Further west, still some spells of rain to watch out for, and generally it is going to stay pretty cloudy. As a result, though, temperatures generally staying in double figures. Saturday then is going to be a cloudy, damp day across some eastern parts. Some brisk winds here adding to a rather cool feel as some rain feeds its way in from the North Sea. Further west and across central southern parts too, there will be a scattering of showers around, perhaps less likely to see thunder compared to today. Temperatures similar, still a bit disappointing for the time of year. Sunday does look like it will start off a bit brighter, but we could see a bit more cloud building as we go through the day, and there will be some showery outbreaks of rain around, but perhaps as a whole it does look like it will be a slightly drier day than today and tomorrow.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. There's queues for the eastbound M8 in Glasgow at the moment. Just at the turn-off at junction 19, Anderston Cross is part blocked by a breakdown. Queues prior to junction 21. Southbound M6 queuing down towards the Corley services. There was an earlier breakdown that's now clear but still quite slow prior to junction 4. Issues on the A1M southbound in Hertfordshire this lunchtime between Stevenage South at junction 7 and Welwyn at junction 6. All the traffic is currently being held. It's at the scene of a collision causing queues northbound as well. Eastbound M4 toward London, Heathrow at 4 to Hayes and Heston at 3, a lane shut, a collision causing delays. And if you're heading in towards Wales, the westbound M4 queuing for over an hour heading through towards the Brynglas tunnels, so struggling heading through towards Newport. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Right, it's 2:39. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain, and it's Martin up next. He joins us now. Martin, what's coming up on your show then? What have you got for us?
Guys, let's face facts. It's time for Joe to go. Let's just drop the pretense. Let's drop the act. It's time. President Putin, Vice President Trump, all those Democrats that have been supporting this nonsense for months should hang their heads in shame. Their man has to be removed from the battlefield. I'll speak to a Democrat party congressman for their take, and also a former Trump advisor, but they want him, of course, to stay. Plus, join the revolt, Nigel Farage said about the Reform Party, but now is there a revolt within the Reform Party? Ben Habib booted out as the deputy leader of the party. Not at all happy about that. Nigel Farage facing his biggest challenge over internal politics, and only 2 more sleeps to go, of course, until Berlin. The Three Lions, can they do it? I'll speak to a Spanish football journalist who says England are the team that the favourite Spain fear the most. They think it's finally coming home. 3 till 6 p.m.
Goodness me, so the Spanish are quivering in their boots. Excellent stuff.
What we like to hear.
That is exactly what we like to hear. I hope he's right. Bodes well, I'd say. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you.
Well, just to remind you, of course, the semi-final hero, Ollie Watkins, is due to speak to the press ahead of that final on Sunday. We can see the room filling up there for this press conference, which we will bring you live as soon as it starts.
Yes, good stuff. Now, an extensive manhunt, moving on from the football, an extensive manhunt continues after 2 suitcases with human remains were found on Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol.
Yes, Avon and Somerset police have released images of the suspect and urged anyone who sees him not to approach him and to call 999 immediately.
Yes, so the police have confirmed that just before midnight on Wednesday, the suspect was taken to the Bristol landmark by taxi, where passers-by reported a man acting suspiciously.
Well, joining us now is former police sergeant Harry Tang, because, Harry, this is a deeply concerning and slightly curious case.
It is. Hello, Tom. Hello, Emily. It is, and it's unusual, isn't it? It's the sort of thing you usually see on some thriller or whatever, and people aren't used to it so close to home. It's quite frightening. It's an interesting one. The police have got a massive scale operation now. They've got to identify a few things. They've got a number of scenes. So if you're looking at the CCTV, and there's a lot of very useful Ring doorbells out there that people can assist with, it's a very clear description. I don't think it's a matter of time. It's probably a matter of time, or they have a good idea who it is right now. And if you look at his footwear, on the full image, there's really thick white soles that, if you didn't see him since, because he disposed of them, you probably remember someone wearing them beforehand. The forensics, of course, are going to be on the bridge, the cases. It's going to be in the taxi. They'll be looking where the taxi picked the person up, how he actually ordered the taxi. Was it cash? Was it cards? All these things are traceable. And what is it? The app, of course. And then you've got the post-mortem. This will be a forensic post-mortem, which is different from the standard post-mortem. Post-mortem will tell you how someone died, and it's used for non-suspicious. Then you get the Home Office forensic pathologist who will tell you how they died. So not in what process and in what order, and whether they were tortured and whether ligatures were used, etc. And it will tell the police a lot more about that individual. I imagine it won't be long before we establish the identity of that person with DNA. DNA will be looked for in the taxi, as well as all the rest of the scenes, of course. And of course, we don't know if he's the killer or not. He could have been just the person transporting. He's come to the actual security part of Clifton, from what I can see from the information we've had. He hasn't been able to get through. He's then sort of been in a panicky situation. And then some say he's been chased by a cyclist, but the security guards, good for them, have alerted very quickly, and the police were there within 10 minutes. So if he's panicked, hopefully he's made more mistakes, and that they can establish some more details to trace him.
I thought eyewitnesses had said that there were two men. We have that picture there of what appears to be a young-ish black man with a cap and, as you say, with those trainers on. But I heard from eyewitnesses that perhaps there was another man, a white man.
Yes, exactly. And I've tried to look into that a little bit more, but I haven't found anything else. I wouldn't, until the official information is across, because if there was a white man, then I would have expected a description, unless they were very well covered, and there's no point releasing something that's just a blur. But I also know, through my 30 years on frontline policing, is that witnesses, very well-meaning witnesses, but they can, when they're thinking back, think things that just aren't correct. I mean, I've had things where people say they were coming from the top of the hill down to the bottom and they crashed, when in fact they were going uphill. So it's well-meaning. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I haven't heard too much about that.
Yes, human memory, I suppose, is imperfect, and we can all sort of misremember and then remember our misremembering and be completely convinced that we knew what we saw when we didn't see anything like it. But Harry, this is, of course, both a missing persons case, it's a manhunt, but it's also a mystery.
It is. It's a mystery. And I think the pieces will start to fall into place very quickly, because we have that very good description. Now, there are a lot of young men in this country who we have no idea who they are, of course. They might have a criminal record as long as your arm, but in another country. And that will take a longer time to establish with Interpol or whatever, or going with Europe, etc. But we don't know if this is a gang crime. We don't know if this is just... but it's a big step, isn't it, from killing someone and then literally getting them into 2 suitcases and then moving them to try to, I assume, throw them from the bridge into the water. Because if it gets to the water, the chances are, yes, the cases may wash up, but it's just as likely that they can enter the sea and never be seen again, which can often happen in our waterways. So good for those security guards. Thank goodness for the cameras that have given us that good picture. And yes, the police, their net is spreading much, much quicker. And I hope it will be a member of public who recognises the individual. I hope it will be somebody who's caught them on further CCTV or whatever, or even police informants. They're out there. Police informants won't like what's happened and will inform the police as well. So watch this space for the next 24 hours, and I think things will develop. I have a hunch over it.
Well, of course, I mean, Clifton Suspension Bridge is very much in prime view. You can see it from so many directions. Of course, there'll be a lot of surveillance there as well. It is almost bizarre that this suspect, if he has committed a crime or whatever, would do so there. But thank you very much indeed, Harry Tang. Always great to get you on to discuss crime issues. Former police sergeant, of course.
Well, we promise it will happen.
Will it?
Yes, the semi-final hero, Ollie Watkins, due to speak to the press ahead of the final on Sunday. We're going to bring you this press conference live. You can see the room still filling up as soon as he does speak and indeed gets there behind the sort of desk there. We'll bring you this live, anticipating it highly.
Building.
Yeah, but first a little break.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Well, we've got quite an extraordinary story to talk to you about now because a triple amputee war hero is launching a bid to become the first to sail across the Pacific Ocean non-stop, solo and unsupported.
Craig Wood was blown up as a teenager by the Taliban in Afghanistan, but now he's hoping to change the perception of disabled people and raise money for other limbless veterans like himself. And Craig joins us now. Morning.
So, Craig, you are extraordinary. You are planning to take up to 80 days to sail from La Paz in Mexico to Japan.
Yeah.
How many miles is that?
It'll be over 6,000.
Amazing.
Amazing. And it will take you how long?
The minimum it's going to take me is 60 days. It could be up to 80. Yeah.
And that's on your own. You've done plenty of this before, haven't you? You've done lots of solo sailing.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of solo sailing, but not as big as this. It is the world's biggest ocean, after all.
And why that particular route?
I wanted it to be a challenge, not just for me, but for anyone.
Right.
So any able-bodied person can look at this and go, wow, that is difficult.
Yeah.
And so that was the main drive. Then it's become a bigger thing than that now. I'm raising money for charity and I can truly inspire people to change their perception on what is possible for disabled people.
And if you don't mind, can we ask you what happened in 2009 in Afghanistan? What were the circumstances of your injury?
I was on a normal routine foot patrol. About 5 metres in front of me, a commando IED was triggered. And subsequently, I became a triple amputee. Both legs above the knee, left hand at the wrist, facial injuries, etc., etc.
The People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, excitement continues to grow as we are just 2 days away from England's Euros final against Spain. I should say it's 10 minutes to 3 o'clock and you're watching Good Afternoon Britain. I'm that excited. We're diving straight into the content. Of course, that final is set to take place on Sunday evening.
Yes, they'll be gearing up, practising, rehearsing their strategies. The England manager, Gareth Southgate, has said that his players need to be tactically perfect if we are to beat the Spanish team, who impressively overcame France in their semi-final. But, as Martin Dobney was just telling us, the Spanish are fearful. 2.
Fearful of the Three Lions, as they should be. But ahead of this momentous game, the first final the English men's team has ever played on foreign soil, let's cross to that foreign soil in Berlin, where the final will be taking place with GB News reporter Jack Carson. And good to see that the weather is not as is just as terrible in Berlin as it is in London.
Yeah. Well, it's thunderstorms here in Berlin at the moment, but let's hope England are lightning on Sunday in that final, shall we? I mean, we're here, of course, right in the centre of Berlin. I mean, just you saying there, Tom, that England are in the final of the Euros is just getting me all giddy and excited once again. And you can just feel that just tinge of anticipation, that tinge of excitement on so many people's faces, on so many people's voices when you talk to them. There's been quite a few England fans here that are coming here already, that have maybe travelled from different parts of Germany, travelled from Dortmund, where they've watched the semi-final. You can just feel that excitement, feel that kind of rush of energy that we are here once again in our second consecutive European Championship final. And the players know, Gareth Southgate knows, as you were just saying there, England need to be tactically perfect. Declan Rice has said in a press conference this week that that 2021 final where we lost on penalties to Italy still haunts him. So the players know they've got this redemption. They want to redeem themselves and go all the way this time. Gareth Southgate, in the passion that he showed after that semi-final, was shouting to the fans, one more time, but can we do it? And of course, we've been speaking to some of the fans here that have already arrived in Berlin. Here's what they told us earlier on.
We're going to win it, aren't we?
Win it. It's our time.
It's ours.
We've
got
waited
it
long enough. This is our year now.
First abroad final. It's got to be a change of luck from 3 years ago.
Are you going to the game?
Yep,
absolutely.
Yeah, we think 2-0 England this time.
How are you feeling? How are the nerves?
To be honest with you, not nervous. I was way more nervous for the semi-final because, you know, if we'd lost tickets for the final, it's not quite the same as it coming to watch somewhere else. But now there's a feeling we've got there. We're just going to enjoy it. It'll be a great game. I think we'll set up well against Spain. I don't think they'll fancy playing us. And let's just see whether we can continue that improvement. If we continue the level of improvement we've seen game on game, we'll win it, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, where we are now, right now in Berlin, of course, this is where the broadcasters have been broadcasting from. And if we just switch around, Tom and Emily, here we are at the Brandenburg Gate. This is the historic part of Berlin. This whole place is filled with history. And there is one thing that England have to do, and that is make more history, being the first men's team to win on foreign soil, win that final on Sunday. Can we do it? I just feel the excitement. The fans are feeling the excitement. Surely it's coming home.
Jack, my goodness me, your excitement is infecting us right the way through the capitals of Europe. We're all very... Jack, thank you so much for bringing us that report live from Berlin.
I think that's cheered us up, hasn't it?
I think so.
Hope it's cheered you up at home. With all the bad news that's going on, it's great to look forward to something. So, yes, Sunday, be there, don't miss it.
And also, don't miss Martin Daubney, who's up next. We're, of course, back on Monday at midday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. It is going to be a bit messy as we go into this weekend. There'll be some rain, some showers around and a glimmer of sunshine at times. Looking at the bigger picture, and there is high pressure just to the west of us, but also various features bringing some showery rain for some too. In the southwest, watch out for some heavy thundery downpours as we head towards this evening. Could cause some localised issues. Elsewhere, there'll be some clouds, some showery rain. Some thicker cloud brings some more persistent rain to eastern parts of England as that pushes in from the North Sea. Perhaps a little bit drier further west, still some spots of rain around. A lot of cloud though, so temperatures generally holding up in double figures, especially in the towns and cities. Through tomorrow morning then, a damp picture across eastern parts, further outbreaks of rain here. In the south though, any showers will have cleared overnight, so it's a mostly dry picture here in the southwest. Some sunshine earlier on, cloudier further east. Further outbreaks of showery rain as we head further northwards. onwards. Always brightest the further west you go because of that high pressure that I mentioned earlier. Further east, it is always going to be that bit cloudier, that bit damper, and there'll be some blustery winds to watch out for too. Little change as we go through the rest of the day. We are going to see that rain across the eastern parts pushing a bit further west, and so more places likely to turn a little bit damper, but further west still some bright or sunny spells and just a few showers to watch out for. Some of those showers could be heavy, possibly thundery, but not looking as intense as those that we've seen today. Temperatures are going to be a little bit below average for the time of year and feeling pretty cool towards those eastern coastal parts because of the cloud, the rain and those brisk winds. More rain pushing in from the North Sea as we go through later Saturday into Sunday. Elsewhere staying largely dry, some bright sunny spells, and in fact Sunday doesn't look too bad, just a few showers to watch out for before more rain arrives in time for the beginning of next week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Summer could be a scorcher with your chance to win £30,000 cash, our biggest cash prize today.